Chapter 932. Why didn't I know about such an important matter? Rinpoche put his hands on his knees and looked at the two men in front of him calmly. Your Highness, Her Majesty's news came directly from the Protectorate of the Northeast, and we had to wait 1.5 days for the messenger bird to arrive, one of the men said with an aggrieved look. Directly from the Protectorate of the Northeast? Who are you? What are you responsible for? What are you doing? Why wasn't there any news of such an important matter? Didn't you notice any clues? What's the use of you people then? Are you useless? Rinpoche's voice became calmer, and his face remained calm. However, his words were merciless, and the sweat on the heads of the two men increased. Please calm down, Your Highness. We didn't do our job well. Please give us another chance. We will definitely get to the bottom of this matter. The two of them didn't dare to argue anymore and said, Calm down. Her Majesty is angry. What can I do to appease her? Rinpoche snorted and looked at the two men gloomily. We didn't do our job well. Humph. Rinpoche sat in the seat of honor and looked down at the two men for a long time before saying, Investigate. Every bit of information, every trace of it, had to be thoroughly investigated. Don't let go of even the slightest bit. There won't be a next time. Yes. Rinpoche rubbed his eyebrows after the two men left. This matter didn't only concern the Yun nation, but also the integration of the Aboriginals and other races. Even the Jing tribe was included. After all, the Jing tribe was also considered an outsider to the Aboriginals. It had only been 4 years since they came to Lan City in broad daylight. Although this matter concerned the Jing tribe, Rinpoche didn't say it out loud. He didn't want others to think that the Jing tribe and the Aboriginals were separated. In fact, he couldn't let them have such thoughts. Even the people of the Jing tribe couldn't integrate with the Aboriginals. Other people could feel this way, but he couldn't let these words come out of his mouth. As a superior, he had to pay attention to every word and action. With the Empress's anger, the violent machine of Dayo immediately started to operate. Except for 500 of the 2,000 winged cavalry warriors who stayed behind in Lan City, the rest followed Qin River to the Yun nation under the Empress's orders. As for the Protectorate of the North, Hongwu also dispatched 10,000 soldiers and their experts. Rinpoche didn't set off with Qin Xuan. Instead, he continued to stay in Lan City. On one hand, he had to arrange some matters, including the Academy, various research institutes, the Department of Commerce, and even the Protectorate. Most importantly, he was still waiting for the many experts who had returned from the 60,000 mountains. If he wasn't here and those experts heard about this when they returned, there might be some trouble. After all, those experts definitely wouldn't just stand by and watch. The Yun nation had always been a part of Great Xia, and the ancestors of the people of the Yun nation were also from Great Xia. It was difficult to separate the two sides. Since Dayo had conquered the Yun nation, they couldn't say anything based on their status. However, if Dayo wanted to start a massacre in the Yun nation, many people would definitely oppose it. Given the Empress's current situation, she couldn't tolerate any disobedience. In such a situation, he could only mediate by himself. Besides, he had an idea. Was this really done by the people of the Yun nation? All the experts in the Yun nation had given up their lives? How could this be? There must be a problem somewhere. Previously, Su Xianxian was poisoned and Luohua sect was exterminated. What was their purpose? Were they targeting Luohua sect or Dayo? Although there was no evidence, Rinpoche felt that there was an invisible connection between these two incidents. This was because the consequences of these two incidents were to provoke the relationship between Dayo, Great Xia, and the practitioners of the Yun nation. In particular, if this incident wasn't handled well, the entire Yun nation would be in turmoil. The Aboriginals would also be isolated and hated by the practitioners of other countries. It would be extremely difficult for the Homecoming organization to achieve its original goal of absorbing all the experts of the human race. Rinpoche suspected that the foreign races had spies among the human race. After waiting in Lan City for 4 days, Rinpoche finally saw everyone return. Beside him were Lin Yu, who was holding melon seeds, and Lin Xiaola, who was holding a lollipop in her mouth. Lin Yu? Rinpoche didn't know what she was thinking. After eating melon seeds in Lan City for 10 months, she wandered around the city in high spirits every day. She even bought 2 Jean Pingmei books, one for herself to read, and the other for her collection. As for Lin Xiaola, Rinpoche felt that he couldn't let her continue to eat, sleep, and eat. It just so happened that he was going to the Yun nation and needed to bring 2 experts with him, so he pulled her out of this cycle. After that, Lin Xiaola and Lin Yu got into a fight and became very close after that. As for the reason for the fight, Lin Xiaola felt that milk candy was the most delicious, while Lin Yu felt that melon seeds were the most delicious. Just like how Rinpoche didn't understand why the two of them fought over this matter, he also didn't understand how these two stupid girls could eat from the same bowl in just 2 days. Lin Yu's wooden food bowl was always carried with her and never let anyone touch it. However, there was something that Rinpoche wanted to tell Lin Yu several times, but he didn't know if he should say it. He had never seen Lin Xiaola wash that bowl. The three of them waited for an hour at the top of the city wall, and finally the experts returned. Unlike when they set off with full confidence, the people who returned weren't dejected, but they weren't in high spirits either. It could be imagined that more than a dozen top experts besieged one person, only to end up seriously injured, and one of them even died. If the other party hadn't missed the opportunity and couldn't escape, these experts would have been too ashamed to face anyone. In addition to the many experts who returned, there were also 2 carriages that were covered with cloth, and the Negu people were locked inside. "Everyone, it's been hard on you all this time." Rinpoche greeted them with a smile. "It's nothing." Everyone waved their hands and said with an ugly expression, "This time, we finally know that we are still frogs in the well. Everyone, let's go back to the city and rest first. Her Majesty has prepared a banquet for everyone." Rinpoche led everyone back to the city. This wasn't the time to talk yet. Before they reached Beihong district, someone said, "The atmosphere in the city seems a little off. The way the commoners look at us is also different from the last time. Did something big happen?" He had to admit that these experts were really sharp enough to be able to detect a slight change in the atmosphere in the city so quickly after 10 months. Something happened in the Yun Nation. 34 spirit wheel experts and thousands of earth wheel experts surrounded and killed the Deputy Protector General of the Protectorate of the Northeast, as well as 2 lieutenant generals and 10 100-man patrol teams. They even dismembered the corpses into pieces and piled them up. How is that possible? Everyone was surprised to hear this news. There were only a few thousand earth wheel experts in the entire Yun Nation. Thousands of earth wheel experts participated in the siege? Furthermore, they used such a cruel method? Their reaction was the same as Rinpoche's. It was impossible. Rinpoche frowned and said, "If I wasn't waiting for you, I would have set off long ago. The impact of this matter is too great. Her Majesty is also furious and blood will flow like a river. We must find out who is behind this so that it doesn't lead to a disaster." Chizi Xiao. Everyone sensed something unusual from Rinpoche's words. "This matter is Dayo's internal affairs. Not only is Her Majesty furious, but I am also furious. I am going to the Yun Nation this time to give those who didn't participate in this matter one last chance. As for whether they can grasp this opportunity, it will depend on themselves." Everyone frowned. Rinpoche immediately said that this matter was Dayo's internal affairs and that he was telling them about it. It couldn't be without reason. Everyone understood what he meant. "Let's talk about this with the old beggar later. The old beggar has 2 acquaintances in that area. They can help us ask if there's any misunderstanding or if someone is playing tricks on us. It's impossible for all the practitioners of the Yun Nation to be involved in this matter." Gluttonous Duke said with a frown. "I have a junior who is staying in the Yun Nation. I can also write a letter and have Zhao Prince Consort deliver it to him," Gao Yi said straightforwardly. If he wanted to kill all the practitioners of the Yun Nation, these people would naturally oppose it. Since Rinpoche had the intention to investigate this matter, it meant that there was still a chance to turn things around. At the very least, there wouldn't be too many innocent people, and everyone was willing to help him. "I have nothing to do right now, so I will go with you. You won't be unwelcoming, right?" Li Yuanzhu nodded at Rinpoche. Not only Rinpoche, but she also immediately thought of the poisoning of Su Xianxian and the extermination of the entire Luohua sect. The similarity between these 2 incidents was that the other party's methods were astonishing, and the strength hidden in the dark was also very astonishing. Whether it was poisoning Su Xianxian and putting him in a life-or-death situation or exterminating the entire Luohua sect, these weren't things that ordinary forces could do. Moreover, the impact of these 2 incidents was detrimental to the integration of the entire human martial arts world, and there might be some relationship between them. Chapter 933. The banquet that night could not be considered lively. After all, everyone did not return victorious. In fact, it could even be said that they were dejected. However, this banquet couldn't be skipped. The next day, many of the experts returned while he headed for the Yun Nation. In addition to Lin Xiaola, Lin Yu, Lin Xiaola's best friend, also came along. The 2 girls who weren't very smart, felt like old friends at first sight. They regretted not meeting each other earlier. Buy one get one free. The other 2 were Gluttonous Duke and Li Yuanzhu. There was also another person who Rinpoche would never have thought of, Xinjia. Her Majesty has ordered me to follow Zhao Prince Consort no matter where he goes. Xinjia pushed up her spectacles, which flashed brightly. His Majesty asked you to protect me? Do you need to follow me to the washroom? Rinpoche laughed. This commander's greatest strength was his loyalty, but his greatest weakness was that he only had loyalty. Alright, he was good at fighting. However, he knew nothing about what was happening outside the palace. No, your Majesty means to follow them. Even when we eat and sleep we have to follow him. Xinjia said frankly. Xinjia believed that she had completely understood the Empress's orders. Rinpoche opened his mouth. Even if Her Majesty wants you to keep an eye on me, can't you at least say that it's my personal protection? Was there a need to be so direct? She nodded at him and smiled. Qi Zixiao is very attentive to you, her husband. Rinpoche sighed faintly. Isn't that person guarding against you? Women. Be it the emperor of a country or the lowly peddler, there were some things that people were born with. This was talent. But your Majesty, aren't you thinking too much? After all, he's the third most powerful expert in the world. How many of them would be as blind as you are? People nowadays only know how to look at appearances, how superficial. What was the use of looking at one's face? Wouldn't they still have to compete in the end? I'm wrong. That's the third most powerful expert in the world, Lin Xiaola, who can't be abducted by a lollipop. Lin Yu wasn't someone who could be abducted with just a handful of melon seeds. Depart. On the road, Li Yuanzhu and Gluttonous Duke noticed that the road from Lan City to the Yun Nation was different from other places. There was an extremely clean and tidy road that looked like stone but wasn't. They had seen this material in Lan City before. It seemed to be called cement. He didn't expect Dayo to use this material to pave the roads. Where does this road lead to? She asked. Yun Nation. How extravagant. This path didn't exist a few years ago. Gluttonous Duke was speechless. From construction to completion, it took a total of more than 3 years and is more than 1,600 kilometers long. Rinpoche was quite proud of this road. This was the first official road in Dayo, but it wasn't the last. With this path we can probably shorten the time by half. You guys have put in a lot of effort. It seems like those nobles from the Yun Nation who have escaped don't have to suffer anymore. Gluttonous Duke said casually. Putting aside Rinpoche's nuclear bombs, it would only take 4 to 5 days to travel from Lan City to the Yun Nation on horseback. It would be difficult for those people to cause any trouble. The railway from Lan City to the Yun Nation, which is still under construction, has been completed. In 2 days we can send 100,000 soldiers from Lan City to the Yun Nation. Rinpoche pointed into the distance. The two of them were skeptical. It was not impossible to cover 1,000 miles in 2 days. If it was the big bird that Rinpoche was riding, it could reach in 1 day. However, it was different for 100,000 soldiers. Including provisions and armaments, it wasn't a small number. It would be good if they could reach the speed of a normal carriage in about 10 days. Although the two of them had never led troops before, they could imagine it. Rinpoche saying that it would only take 2 days was really amazing. Hey, this road is better than the official road in Great Xia. Lin Yu suddenly exclaimed after half a day on this road, and the three of them chatted for a long time. It's indeed much better than the previous road. The original road is covered in mud when we run. Lin Xiaola nodded her head. She had followed Rinpoche to many places and knew the condition of those dirt roads very well. Lin Yu looked pensive. The next day she continued to look pensive. On the third day she suddenly thought of something and said, "Your alms bowl seems to have a smell." Rinpoche immediately covered his face. You two have been eating from the same alms bowl for several days and you only realize this now? This is body fragrance. He said so. Lin Xiaola pointed at Rinpoche. Lin Yu continued to look pensive. Li Yuanzhu and Gluttonous Duke had strange looks in their eyes. Both of them could tell that Lin Xiaola wasn't very smart, but people who weren't smart wouldn't lie. How did Rinpoche say this to her? It wasn't uncommon for rabbits to eat the grass near their nests, but to dare to eat grass near Qi Zixiao's nest was really bold. Rinpoche quickly said, I didn't say that. Lin Xiaola, when did you learn to make false accusations? That time when you ate from Her Majesty's bowl, you said that it had body fragrance. Lin Xiaola said righteously with a "don't try to deny it" look on her face. Rinpoche was speechless. The group brought 50 guards, all of whom were riding high-quality mounts, and caught up with Qin Chuan at the border of the Yun Nation in 4 days. Sir Qin, this time the two of us are out on a mission. We will have to trouble you. Rinpoche cupped his hands. Zhao Prince Consort, you don't just do things, right? Qin Xuan cupped his hands at Ren Baqin, looked up and pointed at Li Yuanzhu and the others with his chin. Forget it, I can't control what Zhao Prince Consort wants to do. Her Majesty gave me an order to not let anyone off. This is Her Majesty's order. Ren Baqin handed the Empress's handwritten letter to Qin Xuan. After he opened it, he felt as if there was a mountain on the paper, and every word was a beautiful mountain peak. This was the Empress's handwriting. The essence, qi and spirit of her handwriting were all condensed in it. Ordinary people would be intimidated by the words at a glance, but experts could see the strength of the person who wrote it. Back then the Empress had used this method to deceive many experts in Great Xia. Qin Xuan glanced at it, folded the letter seriously and put it in his pocket. Sir Ren, I will head to Pingdu first and rest there for a month. I will also use this time to collect information on the various sections. After a month, I will sweep through each and every sect from the big to the small, and let them see if my saber is sharp. Thank you, Sir Qin. Ren Baqin smiled. 1 month wasn't a long time. However, at this time it was considered not bad. As for collecting information on the various sects, it was just a casual excuse. Zidonglai had probably checked all the ancestors of the various sects in the Yun nation by now. We will meet again in Ping City in 1 month. Ren Baqin cupped his hands at Qin Xuan. This time it was different from the last time in Tianjing Basin. In Tianjing Basin, everything was laid out in the open. Whether it was the other party or his own side, they could crush them with force. This time there was a mastermind hiding behind the scenes. If they did the same thing as last time, they probably wouldn't be able to find anything even after a month. At that time all the practitioners in the Yun nation would be wiped out. Thus they simply split up. Of course, Ren Baqin didn't expect their whereabouts to be hidden from others, but it was more convenient to act this way. Besides, with Li Yuanzhu, Gluttonous Duke, Lin Yu, Lin Xiaola, and Xanzhe around, there was no need to worry about their safety. Chapter 934. After getting rid of the guards, Ren Baqin felt relaxed. This was the first time since he came to this world that he didn't have to bring rows of guards with him. Although Lin Xiaola was by his side, there was no difference whether this girl was there or not. As for Xanzhe, wouldn't it be nice to keep her by his side? However, she really carried out what she said back then. She would follow Ren Baqin even to the toilet. Even when he returned to Earth, she would sleep on the floor of his bedroom and wear her armor. Ren Baqin felt that he was going crazy from being stared at for the past 2 days. With someone staring at you from behind, most people wouldn't even be able to pee. Other than this small flaw, Ren Baqin was still full of anticipation for this trip. Thinking about it, apart from Xanzhe, there weren't any aboriginals accompanying him. On his left was the third most powerful expert in the world, on his right was an expert ranked 20 or so, and behind him was an expert ranked 10 or so who wasn't very smart. Apart from Gluttonous Duke, all of them were accompanied by beautiful women, although most of them had holes in their brains. However, the identities of these people made Ren Baqin look forward to roaming the world. Their happiness lasted until they entered the city. What are you looking at? Haven't you seen a bald man before? Ren Baqin glared at the guards at the city gate with a fierce look on his face. They had been staring at his bald head for a long time. A guard smiled and said, "Please wait a moment." However, a few minutes later, another person with a slightly higher position rushed over. He seemed to be the leader of a small squad. He stepped forward and cupped his hands respectfully. "May I know which ancient lord you are? What brings you to Liang City?" Ren Baqin knew that he wasn't an aboriginal. Even though he didn't think so, to others this person in front of him was definitely an aboriginal. He was bald, tall, and had a ferocious look on his face. Just a glare from his eyes would cause one's heart to tremble. Regardless of whether it was the Yun nation or Great Xia, it wasn't that there weren't any burly people, but that there weren't any baldies. Even if one was really bald, one would need to pluck a few handfuls of hair from somewhere else to cover his head. In the past, baldies were rarely seen in the Yun nation, but recently they were common. However, they were all in groups, whizzing by. I don't see anyone acting alone. Therefore, the captain was a little nervous when he saw Ren Baqin alone. He didn't know the other party's purpose for coming. "Which eye of yours thinks that I'm from the aboriginals?" Ren Baqin glared. "Huh." The squad leader was stunned. No matter how he looked at it, the person in front of him looked like an aboriginal, but if he was really an aboriginal, he definitely wouldn't say such a thing. "Aren't I just a little bald? A little fatter? Is there anyone in the aboriginals with such delicate features like me?" Ren Baqin threw 2 silver beans at her. The other party didn't know if there was anyone in the ancient race who was as handsome as him. but there was definitely no one who would greet them the moment they met. If they were really aboriginals, they would be punched and kicked if they were even a little slower in giving way. Last time the two guards at the west gate were the same. One of them suffered a kick and was sent flying, vomiting blood on the spot. He was bedridden for half a month. Thinking of this, the squad leader felt relieved and hurriedly gave way with a smile. Even though the person in front of him wasn't the granddaddy of the ancient race, he wasn't someone who could be easily bullied. In particular, this group of people looked very strange. There was a bald aboriginal man, a Taoist nun, two beautiful ladies, and a beggar. With such a group of people gathered together, one didn't need to think to know that they were people from the Jianghu. Rinpoche and his group entered the city. Even though Rinpoche tried his best to appear very experienced along the way, his gaze was like that of a curious baby. There were even two curious babies following behind him. After all, he had been in Dayo ever since he came here. Even though he had been to Great Xia once, he was in a seriously injured state. Along the way, he had been wandering around the wilderness and had never seen the cities of Great Xia before. Hey, that's a sugar figurine, right? It's quite rare. How much is it? Give me 10. Pinch our faces. If you don't do it well, I won't give you money. That's a handmade lantern. This is the first time I've seen this kind of thing and it's quite beautiful. Boss, what's this fruit? Is it sweet? How much is one caddy? Rinpoche asked for some information, threw a silver bean over and said, "Give me 10 caddies." He stuffed all the fruits that looked like mangoes into Lin Xiaola's arms and took one for himself, munching on it as he walked. Li Yuanzhu and Gluttonous Duke were amused by his behavior. They knew that these things were rare in Dayo, but they didn't know that these things had always been rare to Rinpoche. After walking for a long time, Rinpoche suddenly stopped and asked, "Have you noticed that after walking for so long, we haven't seen anyone who looks like they're from the underworld?" Rinpoche's first reaction was that those practitioners from the underworld were hiding somewhere and waiting to welcome the coming storm. This place is too close to the border, and it has been chaotic for the past 2 years. Which martial artist would come here for no reason? Gluttonous Duke casually explained. Rinpoche finally understood. Even though the Yun nation had fallen for 2 years and this place wasn't considered the border anymore, it was still the border in the eyes of the people of the Yun nation. Everyone stayed in Liang City for a day, allowing Rinpoche to enjoy traveling abroad in a feudal society. Over the next few days they passed by a few more cities and found that there were no practitioners from the underworld. Not only Liang City, but the other cities also couldn't see any practitioners, especially Shi City, which they had just arrived at. They were already in the heart of the Yun nation, but there were still no traces of practitioners from the underworld. Except for the 3 of them, everyone else felt that something was wrong. The other party's power isn't small. Rinpoche looked serious. He still didn't believe that all the practitioners from the Yun nation could band together to kill Wu Kai and the patrol team, so the current situation could only be caused by the other party. However, he didn't know how they did it. How could they capture so many practitioners from the Yun nation? Other than the Imperial Court of Dayo, which force could do such a thing? Even the Imperial Court of Great Xia couldn't do it. This wasn't just a few dozen or hundreds of pigs, but thousands of experts who could leap onto roofs and vault over walls. There's a place called Shueibua village half a day's journey away from here. I met their chief several times when I was traveling when I was young. I'll go and see what's going on. Gluttonous Duke said to Rinpoche, "Wait for me here. I'll set off now and we'll be back tomorrow night." "Thank you." Rinpoche nodded. Gluttonous Duke left his horse behind and went into the crowd. He found a place with fewer people, appeared on a roof in the distance and left the city in a few flashes. At this time, everyone's mounts had been changed to horses. After all, the mounts of the aboriginals were too eye-catching, especially the Crow General. Once it flashed its bird, people would know that it was Rinpoche who was coming without having to identify himself. After Gluttonous Duke left, Rinpoche searched the city for a moment and found a grocery store with the word Zhang written on it. He made a mark on the wall with his finger before finding a place to rest. Chapter 935. Your Highness. Rinpoche was leaning against the railing on the second floor and looking down at the hall when a man hurried over to greet him. Rinpoche smiled. He had seen the other party when he first entered the door, and it was an old acquaintance, Zhang Changkong. He was the chief of the Golden Ring residence and Zhang Caixin's father. He was currently the vice-captain of the Yun Guards of the Rearguard Commandery. After a few years, Zhang Changkong seemed to be more energetic. He wondered if this old tree had bloomed again after being alone in the Yun nation for so long. Otherwise, why did it look so radiant? However, these things had nothing to do with him. Ren Baqin turned around and entered the room. "Come in and talk." Xinjia was standing behind him just now. When she saw him enter the room, she immediately followed him in and stood in a corner without saying a word. Zhang Changkong carefully closed the door and acted as if he didn't see Xinjia. "Why are you here, Your Highness? I heard that there was a man who looked like an aboriginal heading east from Liang City. I wanted to investigate when I had the time, but I didn't expect it to be Your Highness." Ren Baqin nodded slightly. He didn't tell the people of the rearguard commandery that he was coming. They had done a good job of noticing him when most of their energy was focused on that big case. After all, they had only been in the Yun Nation for more than 3 years and didn't have enough manpower. It seemed like they were developing well locally. If Ren Baqin remembered correctly, there were about 10,000 strong men in the Yun Nation scattered across more than 400 cities. On average, there were about 20 to 30 people in each city. The lowest position in the rearguard commandery was the Tiki, an internal staff member. This kind of strong man was an external staff member, equivalent to a lifelong contract worker, and was mainly responsible for being an informant. "Has there been any movement in the Yun Nation recently? How is your investigation going?" Ren Baqin asked directly. "Your Highness, ever since that incident, the number of Jianghu people on the streets began to decrease. After that incident, the idle Jianghu people on the streets could hardly be seen anymore. Only the martial artists from the gangs would occasionally appear. We originally built a relationship with some of the Yun Nation's martial artists and even recruited a few of them as strong men. We got some information from them, but we haven't confirmed it yet, so we haven't reported it to Your Highness." Zhang Changkong said respectfully. "Speak." "Many martial artists living in remote places have left recently, and their whereabouts are unknown. Looking at their residences, there were no signs of a fight. They had all left on their own. Some of the experts from the sects have gone into seclusion, but the experts from the big sects are the same as usual. It seems like nothing has changed." "What's the situation with the gangs in the Yun Nation? Tell me more." Ren Baqin closed his eyes and listened to Zhang Changkong's voice. "There are a total of 127 well-known sects and gangs in the Yun Nation. Among them there are a total of 13 well-known sections. Among them there are 10 orthodox sects, 2 sects that are neither orthodox nor evil, and there is only one evil sect. These 13 sects were the strongest in terms of strength, status and influence. They were called the upper 13 sects. In other words, the ones I mentioned just now that weren't affected. Apart from the 13 upper sects, there were 41 other sects with spirit wheel experts. Almost all of them only had one spirit wheel expert. These sects weren't weak either. Altogether they had close to 50,000 disciples. The rest were mainly gangs formed by earth wheel experts or sects that used to have spirit wheel experts but had declined. Their scope of operations was limited to one city, and there were even 2 or 3 gangs in the vicinity of a city. There were quite a lot of people in these gangs, but there weren't many experts. In particular, the power of these gangs was mostly in the marketplace. The people we roped in were from these gangs. They weren't as cohesive as the sections. Most of their experts were recruited from outside, so they were easier to rope in." "How many sects aren't affected now?" Ren Baqin asked after pondering for a while. "As far as we know, there are a total of 34 sects that weren't affected. The chiefs of the other sects are either practicing in seclusion or traveling outside." "Were the incidents that happened a few days ago done by these sects?" "According to our recent investigations, there were more or less experts in these sects whose whereabouts were unknown. As for the rest, we still need time to investigate." Ren Baqin opened his eyes, which were filled with coldness. "In other words, these sects are all possible?" "Yes. However, we have calculated that there are only a few hundred experts whose whereabouts are unknown. It seems that they weren't able to quickly surround and kill the patrol team, and none of them escaped. If the top experts were to take action, they would be able to do it. Are there any abnormalities among the ordinary disciples of those sects?" He knew that many things in this world couldn't be calculated according to common sense. A few hundred people couldn't seem to kill the patrol team, Wu Kai, Peng Yu and Li Rui. However, there was a species in this world called the top experts. As long as 2 or 3 of the top experts on the list were involved, it would be enough. No, they have only shrunk their range of activities, and there are no signs of large-scale deployment. Continue to investigate and seize the time. If possible, find a breakthrough in those sections. As for the price, nothing is more important than their lives. In addition, seize the time to investigate the situation of the top experts in the Yun Nation. Ren Baqin said. "Understood. Go." After Zhang Changkong left, The coldness in Rinpoche's eyes gradually faded, and he frowned. If it was true that so many sects were involved, it would be difficult to deal with them. Even if some of the experts and ordinary disciples weren't involved, the empress and all the court officials were furious. They didn't have the mood to determine whether these disciples deserved to die or not. As long as they were involved, they couldn't let any of them go. The empress's order was to kill all the practitioners at the earthwheel level, and the other order was to kill all the sections. The former referred to the idol martial artists of the Jianghu, while the other referred to the more than 100 sections. Had the experts of the Yun nation gone mad? Did more than 100 sects have someone from each sect who dared to participate? Or was there some organization that had its tentacles in all the sects? If that was the case, this organization was really scary. What do you think? Rinpoche asked without turning his head. They deserve to die. Xanji's cold voice sounded. Rinpoche rubbed his eyebrows. Xanji knew his purpose for coming here, let alone the rest of the court and the empress. He reckoned that even the empress didn't have high hopes this time. It wasn't that she didn't trust him, but that she wanted to kill them all. TSK. I'm doing this to save tens of thousands of lives. I'm really a saint. My wife wants to kill someone and I come to save them myself. Rinpoche mocked himself. The door was pushed open and Li Yuanzhu walked in. She said to Rinpoche calmly, "This is for the entire human race." The temperament of the aboriginals was like that. They were unreasonable. You are reasonable, far-sighted, and have great ambitions. That's why you're here. Rinpoche pondered for a while, smiled at her and said, "I can still praise you a little more. I don't think I'm arrogant yet." Li Yuanzhu chuckled. "These are words from the bottom of my heart, Yuanzhu." Rinpoche lamented, "Being praised by the third most powerful expert in the world makes me drunk even though I don't have any wine." Li Yuanzhu pursed her lips and smiled without saying a word. She was puzzled as to why Qi Zixiao would choose such a weak man as her husband. Rinpoche wasn't even a man-wheel expert at the time and was just an ordinary person. Compared to Qi Zixiao, one was in the sky and the other was in the ground. That's right, he was underground, not above ground. However, from their recent interactions, Qi Zixiao had good foresight even though she wasn't good in other aspects. Although this person wasn't strong, he was indeed talented. However, he wasn't proficient in poetry and songs like those scholars. Instead, he was proficient in all aspects. In terms of the nation, Tianjin Basin was subdued by him, and the Jing tribe people now followed his lead. The current situation of the Yun nation was his plan. If it weren't for this incident, the Yun nation would have stabilized in just 2 years. He was the one who wanted to build the official road. Although he hadn't seen its use yet, anyone with a little knowledge would know how useful it was. It was said that Dayo's plan to build a new capital along the river was also planned by him. The shaved ice, glass, street lamps, soap, toothpaste, and even the well salt produced by Dayo during the war were all made by him. As the principal of an academy, he established the first academy in Dayo and nurtured a group of students with practical abilities. He opened bookstores, published newspapers, and enlightened the people. The organization of the Yun nation also relied on him to build the framework. He was also the one who took out the so-called nuclear warheads. Now, he was running around for these Yun nation warriors. It could be said that he alone was equivalent to 1,000,000 soldiers. It had to be said that Qi Zixiao had picked up a treasure. Chapter 936. The people here are so skinny. Lin Xiaola sat on the edge of the bed and muttered as she looked at the people below. They're just like the electric poles in Lan City. Not only was he thin, but he also had a hunched waist. When he walked on the side of the road, he lowered his head and walked quickly. They are all ordinary people. Rinpoche said faintly, "No matter what kind of society you live in, there will always be the poor and the rich. The rich will be rich, while the poor will find it difficult to find food and clothing. These people are still all right. Although their faces are a little malnourished, they still look healthy. If you have the money to eat vegetables, you might as well eat more meat." Lin Xiaola muttered and turned her head away. Rinpoche, well said. If he had grown up in an environment like Dayo, he would probably say, "Why not eat minced meat?" Here, these words were not exclusive to those pampered young masters. The aboriginal commoners were extremely astonished and said, "He can actually afford to eat. I might as well buy some meat to eat." Just look at the people in the prison camp. No matter where they came from, they ate meat until they vomited, and their eyes lit up when they saw a wild vegetable. However, there were also many benefits. They ate meat every day until they vomited and worked hard every day, so their physiques were much stronger. Compared to the city guards of the Yun nation, they looked more like elite soldiers. It had been 3 years. When he returned, he would have to give them paper vouchers as their salaries. On one hand, it was to give these prisoners of war something to look forward to and strive to keep a group of them as technicians after the end of the decade. On the other hand, it was also to prepare for the currency reform. After all, it was inconvenient to use gold, silver, and copper as currency. It also consumed a large amount of copper to circulate in the market. Copper happened to be a metal that Rinpoche desperately needed at the moment. Electric wires, voltage regulator rheostat, and telephone lines. The annual copper output of Dayo and the Yun Nation was simply a drop in the bucket compared to what he needed. Copper alloy has excellent wear resistance, corrosion resistance, castability, and mechanical properties. It can also play a great role in a variety of bearings and mechanical parts. Just like on Earth, the quality of a lot of equipment could be determined by looking at whether the internal parts were made of copper. No matter what, Rinpoche couldn't tolerate this metal, which had such huge uses, being used as currency in the market. However, he had to settle the matters in the Yun Nation first before he could do this. What about those sects experts who were in seclusion or wandering outside? More than half of the leaders of more than 100 sects had actually made such a gesture. What were they doing? Or was he hiding from something? Let's wait and see the news that gluttonous Duke brings back first. If it doesn't work, I might as well capture a few sect leaders and ask them. While Rinpoche was deep in thought, a figure passed through the window and landed beside them. He was wearing patched clothes, had messy white hair and beard, and had a face full of wrinkles. It was gluttonous Duke. First, he grabbed the wine pot and took a big gulp before letting out a comfortable moan. "You've worked hard. How's the situation? Any news?" Rinpoche asked. Gluttonous Duke stroked his beard with an ugly expression on his face. "We've missed. The people in the stronghold are all gone." "Strange, why did that guy leave?" "And all the people in the stronghold had left? From what I've seen, he's been gone for at least 3 months, and there's no sign of him returning." Rinpoche frowned. Although he didn't have eyebrows, his action was still the same. This is not good news. This also confirmed Zhang Changkong's words. Some idol experts had gone missing. "What's his name? What's his strength?" "Lin Yi. The last time I saw him was 10 years ago. At that time, he was only 1 step away from condensing a heaven-grade weapon." Those who could condense a heaven-grade weapon were already considered top-notch experts. As long as it wasn't a rare situation where a heaven-grade weapon didn't improve one's strength, it wouldn't be a problem for one to enter the top 60 to 70 ranks of the world's experts. There were more than 20 spirit wheel experts in Tianjin Basin, but only a few had condensed a heaven-grade weapon. There were only 70 to 80 spirit wheel experts in the entire Yin Nation, and only a dozen or so had condensed a heaven-grade weapon. There were more experts in Great Xia. There were more than 200 famous spirit wheel experts and 30 to 40 who had condensed a heaven-grade weapon. They were only 1 step away from condensing a heaven-grade weapon and could be said to be famous in the entire world. Such a person suddenly disappeared, coupled with the experts from the sects who were either in seclusion or traveling. No matter how one looked at it, this matter was very unusual. Rinpoche pondered for a moment before looking up at Li Yuanzhu and gluttonous Duke. The former was also pondering, while the latter was chewing to his heart's content. One could tell what he liked from his name. He isn't the only one who has gone missing. Many people have gone missing as well. Rinpoche told them about the news that he had received from Zhang Changkong. It was mainly about gluttonous Duke. Although Li Yuanzhu wasn't in the room at that time, the sounds in the entire inn couldn't escape her ears. In that case, something big must have happened. Gluttonous Duke's expression immediately turned serious. "Let's split up," Rinpoche said in a deep voice. "Gluttonous Duke, contact your old friends and Gao Yi's Jr. If you don't find anything, then take the opportunity to investigate the situation. Gluttonous Duke, you can make the decision yourself. As for Jinren Li, I have something to trouble you with." "That's settled then. Where shall we meet?" Gluttonous Duke didn't hesitate at all. He reached out to wipe the grease stains on the side of his mouth and prepared to set off again. "Meet at Yongjiang City in half a month." A map of the Yun Nation flashed across Rinpoche's mind. The largest sect of the Yun Nation was nearby, Mount Luofu. "All right." After saying this, gluttonous Duke disappeared as if he had never been there. There were 2 other tables of customers on the 2nd floor of the restaurant. They had long noticed this strange group of people and immediately widened their eyes when they saw this scene as if they had seen a ghost in broad daylight. A moment later, Rinpoche contacted Zhang Changkong. Zhang Changkong knew that he was here and had been keeping an eye on him. Less than 15 minutes after Rinpoche left the mark, Zhang Changkong appeared in front of him. Rinpoche inquired about the situation of the surrounding sects and asked Zhang Changkong to investigate Lin Ye's whereabouts. He then found Li Yuanzhu and said, "Jinren, there's a boat gang nearby. I'm going to meet their leader tonight. What are your plans?" "He's in seclusion, right? I'll go with you tonight and take a look. I'm getting more and more curious," Li Yuanzhu said faintly. "All right. Regardless of whether there's a mastermind behind this, they definitely won't let you off if they know that you're here. If you die, I'm afraid that we'll have to spend the rest of our lives in this land of exile." Rinpoche smiled. He believed that he had a little ability to protect himself, mainly because Lin Xiaola, Xinjie, and Lin Yu had the ability to protect him. However, even the Deputy Protector General and 2 Captain Commanders of the Protectorate of the Northeast were besieged and killed on the same day. The strength of the other party was definitely far superior to his side. Of course, he could escape with a few people and come back with his big treasure. However, there would be a lot more variables. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second. Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 937. The Boat Gang. Just from the name, one could tell that it was a gang filled with the aura of a marketplace. The boat gang was established more than 100 years ago. At that time, a boat captain met a seriously injured and dying practitioner by chance and obtained a few secret manuals from him. It had to be said that he was quite talented. Relying on self-study and communicating with others, he was able to make a name for himself and become an earth wheel expert. At that time he was grateful for the hard life of his brothers who ran the boat. Now that they were strong, he established the boat gang with the aim of uniting them and not being bullied. The current leader of the boat gang was a descendant of that boat captain. In addition to the leader, there were 2 other earth wheel experts in the boat gang. In the middle section of Mianjiang, they were considered to have some power. Of course, in Rinpoche's eyes, this power was basically no different from that of ordinary people. 3 earth wheel experts weren't enough for Lin Xiaola to sharpen her claws. The boat gang wasn't located on the banks of Mianjiang, but at the foot of a mountain not far away. There was a large manor there. At night, Rinpoche and the others left their mounts in the city and went straight to the boat gang. After running for a long time, Lin Yu suddenly asked, "What are you doing out so late at night?" She didn't know anything, and when she saw everyone coming out, she followed them without a second thought. Of course, if she were to think about it, she would have to think about tomorrow morning. "To meet someone," Rinpoche replied. Lin Yu only responded with an "oh." If there were any problems, they would have to wait until tomorrow morning. The headquarters of the boat gang was quite big and brightly lit. There were tens of thousands of disciples in the boat gang, and most of them were ordinary people. There were usually a few hundred people in the headquarters. There were 4 guards outside the main gate. Rinpoche and the others went around to the side and jumped onto the wall. They could see people coming and going in the distance. Overall, it was peaceful and they didn't know that someone had found them. Rinpoche squatted on top of the wall while Lin Yu squatted beside him. They were like a row of melon eaters. Rinpoche heard crunching sounds and turned to see that Lin Yu was still eating melon seeds. He didn't know how many she had brought from Lan City, but she hadn't finished them after so many days. "Be serious. We are doing business," Rinpoche said with a straight face. "You want to eat?" Lin Yu stretched out her hand and opened it. There was still half a handful of melon seeds left. Rinpoche, without hesitation, he snatched the melon seeds and squatted on top of the wall to observe. After finishing half a handful of melon seeds, Rinpoche happened to see someone coming in from the half-moon gate. He was delighted and ordered, "Capture him and keep him alive." With a gust of wind, Xinjie appeared beside that person. Before that person could react, she had already grabbed him by the neck. Rinpoche motioned for Xinjie to release him after dragging him far away. It was a young man in his 20s. He looked at the people in front of him in fear. "Who are you people? Recognize your own situation. I'm the one asking you, not you." A silver light flashed in Rinpoche's hand. A gold and silver spear appeared in his hand, and he pointed it at the other party's throat. She looked at him in astonishment. This was obviously a heaven-grade weapon that could only be condensed by a spirit wheel expert. How could he have one? Was he hiding his strength? Impossible. It was impossible for the other party to hide from him. Or could it be that he was a spirit wheel expert in the past, but he was seriously injured and fell? No matter how much a spirit wheel expert's strength fell, it was impossible for him to fall to the level of an ordinary person. She still remembered the first time she met him. At that time he was a completely ordinary person. The length, color and the feeling it gave. It was inexplicably familiar. Was it Ting Yu's spear? What was going on? Almost as soon as the silver spear appeared, her attention was completely focused on the spear in Rinpoche's hand. The young man who was being pointed at by the silver spear couldn't believe his eyes when he saw this scene. He then thought of something and his expression suddenly changed. Although few people had seen a spirit wheel expert who had condensed a heaven-grade weapon, almost all of them were famous figures. How could such a person appear here? Not to mention such a top expert, even an ordinary spirit wheel expert wasn't someone that the boat gang could resist. Senior, what do you want to ask? I don't know much. If you go directly to the headquarters, even the left guardian will answer all your questions. Seeing that his goal had been achieved, Rinpoche flipped his palm and withdrew the silver spear. Of course, he could directly barge into the headquarters with his men and threaten the other party to bring him to where the gang leader was cultivating in seclusion. However, that would be too easy to alert the enemy. Up until now, he still didn't know if there were any of his men in the boat gang. He might as well kidnap someone first to understand the situation. I will ask and you will answer. If you are honest, I will spare your life. I don't have any malicious intentions toward the boat gang, but there are some things that I want to understand. Now, let me ask you, is your gang leader cultivating in seclusion? Where is he? How does he communicate with the outside world? How do you know that he is cultivating in seclusion? What happened before he went into seclusion? Who is in charge of the overall situation now? Rinpoche opened his mouth and asked a series of questions. The gang leader is cultivating in a cave in the mountain behind the headquarters. He went in by himself and nothing happened before he went in. Sometimes he would send a voice from inside to get people to send things in. Every time, it is the left guardian who sends the things in. Now, the left guardian is in charge of the overall situation. The other party didn't dare to hide anything and quickly spat out everything he knew. You have two guardians, right? What are their names? What's the other guardian doing? The left guardian is Zhuolengtong, and the right guardian is Baizhe. I heard that they have been sent out by the gang leader to do something. Is the left guardian here? Yes. The gang leader is cultivating in seclusion, and the right guardian is out on some matters. The left guardian has been sitting in the headquarters. After getting the information he wanted, Rinpoche nodded at Li Yuanzhu and asked, "Can you knock him out? I'm afraid that I won't be able to control my strength. You should be more experienced in this matter." Rinpoche really didn't know how much strength was needed to knock someone out, and it would be bad if he was beaten to death. He just needed to not be discovered before he met the gang leader. Li Yuanzhu was a little speechless after hearing this. What did he mean by more experienced? However, she still stretched out her finger and flicked the young man in the air. Let's go to the back mountain. Along the way, Li Yuanzhu wanted to ask Rinpoche about the heaven-grade weapon, but she didn't have the chance. In the blink of an eye, they arrived at the back mountain, and she had no choice but to suppress her questions. It didn't take long for everyone to find a platform on the mountainside. There were two man-wheel experts guarding the platform. Without needing Rinpoche to say anything, Li Yuanzhu flicked her finger and knocked them out. Everyone landed on the platform and didn't look around. They only saw two tall wooden doors embedded in a cave in front of them. If she wasn't mistaken, this was where the gang leader was cultivating in seclusion. Without hesitation, Rinpoche stepped forward and kicked the wooden door. Bang! The entire wooden door shook. Rinpoche's face suddenly lit up. It was colorful and exceptionally exciting. This wooden door was actually made of wood covered with iron plates. Damn it, I've kicked an iron plate this time. This thought came to Rinpoche's mind, and the sharp pain in his toes made him gasp. Ah! Rinpoche breathed heavily as if this could alleviate the pain in his feet. Li Yuanzhu, who was beside him, felt like laughing for some reason. This scene was indeed too exciting. Chapter 938. The doctor probably felt that I had damaged his reputation by causing such a small wound. He was a little anxious and strictly forbade me from sitting down to work at night. In addition, my work and rest schedule also affected the healing of the wound. I might as well take a day off last night. Today I will get a bed and table and lie on the bed to write my novel. The pretty boy of the Empress's family took a day off yesterday. Currently typing, please wait a moment. After the content has been updated, please refresh the page to receive the latest update. Chapter 939. The black mud ointment for external injuries and the ointment for bone fracture were the two miraculous medicines that must be brought out whenever one went out. Regardless of whether it was for a vacation or to silence a witness, who would not be killed by someone else. At this time, the value of this godly medicine was revealed. Ren Baqin sat at the side, took off his boots and carefully applied the ointment. Lin Yu, who was standing at the side, seemed to have thought of something. She went up and kicked the wooden door. Boom. Ah, it's really made of iron. Lin Yu confirmed her suspicions with a limp. She took off her embroidered shoes and revealed her white feet. As expected, her toes were visibly red and swollen. He's not in the right mind and neither are you? Can't you just use a kick? Lin Xiaola said resentfully. Ren Baqin, how could he endure Lin Xiaola's words? Li Yuanzhu didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Lin Yu had never been like this before? He heard the noise coming from the foot of the mountain. The noise just now had already spread down, and he reckoned that someone would come up very soon. She went forward and pushed the door with both hands, but it didn't budge. It seemed like a simple push, but Li Yuanzhu used a lot of strength. Even though the door was made of pure iron, it was still sent flying by her push. The door of the boat gang's seclusion place was indeed very sturdy. Not only was the door made of fine steel, but some rare metals had also been added to it. That was indeed the case. Not only was the door made of fine steel, even the stone walls on both sides were made of fine steel. Not only was this cave a place for seclusion, but it also served as an escape route. When Ren Baqin first built this mountain villa, he considered that if he encountered an enemy that he couldn't defend against, this door could at least hold off an ordinary spirit wheel expert for 10 minutes. A cyan bamboo sword appeared in her palm out of thin air. She pointed it forward without making too much noise, but countless cracks spread from the center of the bamboo sword to the surroundings. Soon after, the entire door suddenly collapsed. The door that the boat gang had placed their hopes on was smashed by this simple and ordinary touch. It's empty? Li Yuanzhu said after taking a glance. As expected, it's empty. Ren Baqin wasn't surprised at all. In fact, when he heard that many sex experts were in seclusion, he had already thought of this possibility. There were only 3 possibilities for the whereabouts of these experts. Either they pretended to be in closed-door training, or they were forced into closed-door training, or they were already dead and the closed-door training was just a facade. This time he only came to confirm what kind of person it was. In fact, after that kick, there was no reaction from inside, so he knew it was empty. Since it was empty, the person who knew the whereabouts of the boat gang leader was the left protector. Was he pretending to be in seclusion, hiding his identity to do other things, or was he already dead? Before anyone came up, Ren Baqin took advantage of the light to take a look inside. The cave wasn't very big and there were 3 stone rooms inside. One of them was piled with some food while the other 2 were empty. Who's there? The person who came was very fast. Before Ren Baqin could finish looking around, he heard a voice coming from outside. But the last word sounded like a rooster being grabbed by the neck. Ren Baqin hurriedly walked out. When he was near the door, his gaze suddenly froze. He moved closer to the door and took a closer look. He had some kind of conjecture. He stretched out his hand and pushed outwards. The undamaged half of the door was pushed open. 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 Ren Baqin looked at Li Yuanzhu, who was standing outside with a pained expression. The door opens outward. Li Yuanzhu was speechless. It wasn't locked. It opened with a pull. Li Yuanzhu, she still tried hard to maintain the indifferent attitude of an expert, but the corners of her mouth twitched a little. After all, she had done something stupid. Ren Baqin mourned for his foot for a minute before looking up ahead. There wasn't 1 person but 3. At this moment they were all lying on the ground. Xanja was stepping on one of them with 1 foot and holding another in her hand. In addition, there were also people running up the mountain. Who's the left protector? Zhuolengtong. Ren Baqin asked with a smile. Xanja, let him go. Cough cough. Who are you? How's our gang leader? The person who was being held by Xanja touched his throat with a look of lingering fear. However, he suppressed his fear when he saw the broken door. Do you all like to ask questions? Ren Baqin smiled, and the spear appeared in his hand again. This was much more persuasive than words. Sure enough, the other party's expression immediately changed and he trembled with fear. He wasn't this afraid when Xanja stepped on the 3 of them and rubbed them on the ground. However, it was different now that he knew that the person in front of him was a spirit wheel expert who had condensed a heaven-grade weapon. Who's Zhuolengtong? The man immediately looked at the other man lying on the ground. The other man had already stood up, leaving only this person lying motionlessly on the ground. Ren Baqin's expression changed slightly, and he asked Xanja, "Did you trample him to death?" "I didn't use any force." Everyone's expression changed and they went forward to check on the man. His face was green, his lips were black, and there was black blood and white foam in his mouth. Ren Baqin checked his breathing and found that he was dead. Left protector. The other two people shouted. He committed suicide by taking poison. Rinpoche frowned. He reckoned that the poison had been hidden in his mouth all along. However, this person was really decisive to commit suicide immediately upon seeing that the situation wasn't looking good. What exactly was the identity of this left protector? The manipulator behind the scenes has such strong control? This person was walking at the back, so I thought he was a lackey. Xanja added, explaining why she stepped on him. She also knew what Rinpoche wanted to investigate this time, but the first person he investigated committed suicide by taking poison. She felt somewhat apologetic. Forget it. If I didn't know that they would do this, it would indeed be difficult to guard against them. I will have experience next time. Rinpoche didn't care too much. Although he was already dead, it also verified one thing. There was a big problem with these experts going into seclusion. Furthermore, there was indeed someone from the other party in the boat gang, and he was one of the two protectors under the chief. It wasn't only the boat gang but also the other sections. Everyone, what exactly happened? The man who spoke earlier asked in a pleading tone. After all, the boat gang didn't have the strength to question the people in front of them. Your chief isn't inside. It's empty. As for his whereabouts, I'm afraid only Zhualengtang knows. You have seen the rest, Rinpoche said faintly. Are you looking for our chief? We just want to verify some things. Now we have achieved half of our goal. Rinpoche couldn't be bothered to explain too much, and the other party didn't need to know too much. It was already kind of him to explain this. Let's go. Rinpoche turned and left in the direction where there were no torches. He wasn't afraid of encountering any conflicts with the boat gang, but there was no need to kill more people. This time he came out to save people, not to kill. More importantly, his heart was heavy at the moment and he was even in pain. Damn it, that door actually opened outward. Please remember the domain name of this book. Com. Wonderful Book House mobile version website. Com. Chapter 940. Let's wait and see. Perhaps someone will come out and release a messenger bird or something. Rinpoche circled around and returned to the outside of the manor. Compared to checking them one by one, following the vines to the melon was obviously a better method. Xanja, go to the east side of the manor, Rinpoche said. Her Majesty asked me to follow you. Xanja was expressionless. He sighed, cupped his hands at her and said, Thank you for your trouble. She chuckled and disappeared into the darkness in a flash. After she left, he turned to look at the people around him. They were all very good fighters, but unfortunately none of them were useful. One of them clearly stated that he was here to monitor him, one of them might sleep for 100 years after he was released, and the last one had a bad brain. Hey, can I ask you something? Lin Yu moved closer to him and asked weakly. Ask away. Why did you kick the door just now? Lin Yu felt pity for her toes. My toes are swollen. Rinpoche looked at Lin Yu and then at the sky. How should he answer this question? Say that he had a screw loose? Let's not talk about why I kicked the door. Why did you kick the door? Lin Yu waited for a long time but there was no answer. She persistently asked, Why? Rinpoche turned his head and looked at her. He didn't expect her to be so persistent this time. He thought for a while and said, To test the conjecture. Rinpoche originally wanted to wait for her to ask before telling her that punching a wall would hurt. This was the reaction of force. He didn't expect her to respond with an "oh," and continue to be deep in thought at the side. Rinpoche felt as if he had punched cotton. He was depressed and sullen. If he knew this would happen, he wouldn't have thought about it. Everyone waited until the sky brightened, but they still didn't receive the pigeons that they had expected. There was no point in waiting any longer, so they might as well take the time to visit the other sections. How did you get that heaven-grade weapon? Along the way, Li Yuanzhu finally had the chance to ask the question that she had been thinking about all night. Rinpoche's face darkened. This is probably what it means to be gifted. Although I haven't reached the spirit wheel level yet, I have already condensed a heaven-grade weapon. As he spoke, an iron chain shot out from his body like a snake and coiled around her body a few times. Coincidentally, it was at the top of the mountain and the bottom of the mountain respectively. But it was useless. The prerequisite was that there must be a mountain. Li Yuanzhu's expression changed slightly, and she was a little embarrassed. She didn't pay much attention to the metal chain when it came, but the position where it wrapped around her made her very concerned. She looked at him with a profound gaze. Sorry, I'm not very familiar with it yet, Rinpoche said awkwardly. He had only given the order to keep the other party occupied. He really did not choose this position, and he would not take advantage of an airport. A heaven-grade weapon is condensed by the owner's spirit and is like an extension of the owner's limbs. What the heaven-grade weapon senses is what the owner feels. There was a hint of coldness in her words. Although I'm not Qi Zixiao, I don't mind breaking my limbs. I picked this up. Where did I get this thing? Condensing a divine weapon? How could this be? Also, have you ever seen anyone condense two divine weapons? Not to mention that I'm only an earthwheel expert. Rinpoche immediately changed his words. This was the first time he had heard of this. You picked it up? Li Yuanzhu's face was full of indecipherable meaning. I picked it up, I really picked it up. Rinpoche nodded repeatedly. He really wasn't taking advantage of her. Xianjia? What are you doing? What did you write in the book? After wasting a long time, Rinpoche was still explaining that he picked up this heaven-grade weapon. As for whether she believed him or not, it was obvious from her expression that she didn't. However, Rinpoche himself couldn't explain it clearly. After all, he wasn't prepared to tell her about Earth. Besides, she couldn't figure out why he had two heaven-grade weapons and could only continue to be puzzled. Yun Nation, Hayun District, Misty Rain House. Very few of these sects were located in the cities. Most of them were located in famous mountains and rivers or even in the wilderness. This was the case with the Misty Rain House. The ancestors of the Misty Rain House used to be famous. At its peak, there were 7 spirit wheel experts in the sect, and they were considered to be famous. However, only the chief of the sect was a spirit wheel expert. Even so, the Misty Rain House was still quite famous. The most important thing was that all the disciples in the Misty Rain House were female, and each of them had a slim figure. It was as if they were shrouded in mist, making it hard for people to see them clearly. Although they were clearly standing there and there was no fog around them, it gave off such an illusion. As the ancients said, those who wore clothes were more beautiful than those who weren't. The disciples of the Misty Rain House were the opposite. Even if they weren't wearing clothes, they wouldn't disappoint you at all. Therefore, the female disciples of the Misty Rain House had always been the targets of many young heroes and rich young masters. Early in the morning, a drawn-out voice broke through the thin morning mist that shrouded the Misty Rain House. Suning, Guardian Su, please come out. No noise outside the Misty Rain House. Who's there? Figures shot out like lightning, and one by one, the graceful ladies landed outside the Misty Rain House. Rinpoche glanced around with his hands behind his back. Although the Misty Rain House only had one spirit wheel expert, there were a lot of earth wheel experts. There were also many high-level man-wheel disciples. Their foundation was indeed much deeper than those small sects. The disciples were indeed not bad. Their looks were also not bad. They were clearly standing there for everyone to see, but there was always a sense of mystery that was shrouded in mist. The Misty Rain House was indeed worthy of its name. More than 20 people jumped out with angry looks on their faces. They were obviously angry that someone actually dared to make a ruckus outside the Misty Rain House. Who are you? You're really bold to actually make a ruckus outside the Misty Rain House and even ask Guardian Su to come and see you? Who are you? Have you sent a visitation card? Is this person's head smeared with oil? Who's that Taoist nun? She's so beautiful. She looks so fierce. She doesn't seem like a good person. The ancients once said that a woman was equivalent to 500 ducks. Faced with 10,000 ducks, Rinpoche immediately felt uncomfortable and immediately understood what his Baihu meant when he said that this place was more noisy. Zhao, Prince Consort of Dayo, is here. Suning, come out and pay your respects. Rinpoche said with a sullen face. This was already the 10th day since they left the boat gang. Rinpoche and his group had gone to 17 sects at top speed. Other than the boat gang and the life and death sect that they went to on the first day, the people who contacted the other sects had either disappeared or committed suicide. They didn't see anyone alive. Rinpoche knew that the other party already knew that he was here to investigate this matter, so he didn't hide it anymore. Where did this madman come from? Zhao. Before he could finish his sentence, he was covered up by someone. Is he Zhao, Prince Consort of Dayo? He looks so handsome. His forehead is so shiny. He's indeed not an ordinary person. Zhao, Prince Consort has arrived. Please forgive me for not coming out to greet you. Finally, someone came out to take charge of the situation. It was a rather charming woman in her 30s. She was thick in places where she should be thick and thin. To put it simply, she had a bucket-like figure. However, her expression was refreshing, and her voice was full of energy. She wasn't annoying at all. The people in the Misty Rain House are all little girls who are ignorant of worldly affairs and didn't know that you were here. Please be magnanimous and don't blame us. The person laughed. Are you Suning? Rinpoche sized her up. I'm an Iru. Guardian Su should have come out to greet you, but she has been seriously ill these days. If you want to see her, you can only meet her at the door. But please forgive me for not recognizing you. Can you prove your identity? Aniru bowed and apologized with a smile on her face. The silver spear in Rinpoche's hand appeared out of thin air and then disappeared without a trace. This thing was more useful than any proof of identity. An expert who had condensed a spirit wheel and a heaven-grade weapon was well known in this world, so he naturally wouldn't lie. As for whether the rumored Zhao Prince Consort had such strength, no one dared to doubt it. Sure enough, Aniru's gaze froze. She then bowed and said, I was rash. Zhao Prince Consort, please come in. She waved to both sides and everyone dispersed. After Rinpoche followed her into the Misty Rain house, she probed, May I know why Zhao Prince Consort is looking for Sister Su? Where's your chief? Rinpoche asked. She's in seclusion in a secret chamber and can't be disturbed. I'm afraid we can only wait for her to come out of seclusion before she can meet Zhao Prince Consort to apologize in person. Rinpoche nodded. He didn't ask to meet the chief since the final outcome would be the same anyway. It was more important to meet Suning first. Wasn't Suning fine a few days ago? Why did she suddenly fall ill? Rinpoche asked faintly. In fact, Guardian Su has been ill for a long time, but her condition suddenly worsened recently. Guardian Su, please explain the specifics. Aniru led Rinpoche and the others for more than 10 minutes. There were many courtyards and embroidery buildings on both sides, and it was filled with the smell of women. From time to time, they could see beautiful young girls bowing to them from afar. In particular, there was a woman with picturesque features, a slim figure and extremely attractive. She bowed to them from afar, got up with a smile on her face, and her eyes were sparkling. This is the most outstanding disciple of the next generation in the Misty Rain House. Her name is Yuan Qingyi. After hearing about what you did for the captive camp, she has always been very grateful to you. Someone must have told her about it, so she specially came out to meet you. Aniru chuckled. Rinpoche glanced at her. She was indeed excellent, especially with the mixture of immaturity and shyness on her body. Any man would be attracted to her. Unfortunately, Xianzhe was with him. Xianzhe, what are you doing? What are you writing in the book? The group walked a few rounds and came to a courtyard. Aniru said, Guardian Su looks a little scary when she's sick. You must be mentally prepared. Rinpoche nodded. Aniru stood outside a small building and said, Guardian Su is on the second floor. This way, please. As soon as Rinpoche lifted his foot, Aniru stopped the people behind him and said, Very well. Guardian Su's illness is only transmitted to women and not to men. If you want to go in, you must make some preparations. Rinpoche was a little curious. What kind of illness was only transmitted to women and not to men? He stepped over the threshold and walked a few steps inside. The first floor of the building was full of paintings, especially the woman in red in the painting. Rinpoche couldn't take his eyes off her. Although the woman was just standing there, she gave off the vibe of a towering mountain and was cold. Rinpoche recognized her at a glance. That was obviously the Empress. Why was the Empress's painting here? Why was there a painting of the Empress here? The people outside saw Rinpoche standing there looking at the painting, but they didn't care. They were about to take the veil that Aniru handed over to cover their faces when something unexpected happened. Aniru suddenly exploded without warning, and the sky was filled with a rain of blood. Everyone subconsciously hid. Then, a few loud noises and the ground trembled came from the small building. Everyone took a closer look and saw that the door of the small building was blocked by a 6-inch thick pitch-black iron plate, or rather a piece of iron that had fallen from the top of the door. Oh no, there's danger. Li Yuanzhu dodged and pointed her sword forward. At this moment, a terrifying sword energy shot out from outside the wall, forcing her to turn around to save herself. Lin Xiaola, who was the fastest, had already crashed into the window next to her. Boom. The iron plate wasn't a single piece. The entire interior of the small building was surrounded by the iron plate. Rinpoche was inside and everyone else was outside. Xianzhe's face changed drastically, and her skin began to turn red as if blood was about to drip from the surface of her skin. Her aura rose steadily as she punched the iron block inside the door, each punch stronger than the previous one. After 3 punches, the 6-inch thick iron block was directly smashed into pieces and exploded. However, there was no one in the room. Let's set a small goal first. Chapter 941. Li Yuanzhu stood with her sword in her right hand and looked at the big hole in the courtyard wall. Her eyes became extremely dark like an abyss that seemed to be able to swallow people and the world. Su Wuming? The sword energy just now was so amazing that she had no choice but to turn over and protect herself. Among the famous experts in the world, only one person could use this sword energy, Su Wuming, who had been in hiding for a long time. Moreover, she had heard a little about Su Wuming from Rinpoche. Sai, you don't know what you are doing. The person outside the courtyard wall didn't reveal himself and only let out a long sigh. It's you who doesn't know what you are doing. Li Yuanzhu traversed more than 30 meters in an instant, leaving a faint line behind her. When she pointed with her sword, the air, flowers and courtyard wall in front of her suddenly disappeared as if an invisible beast had bitten them off. Ding! A sword ray suddenly appeared in front of her, as if it was creating something out of nothing. In other words, it tore through space and appeared in front of Li Yuanzhu. The two swords collided and made a soft sound. Li Yuanzhu tapped her feet and retreated several meters. There were abnormal fluctuations in the air. The air on one side of Li Yuanzhu seemed to have encountered an invisible black hole and was sucked toward a certain point. Even the air began to distort. On the other side, the sound of cloth tearing could be heard, and one could vaguely see abnormal cracks in the air. Both sides were in a stalemate for a moment when a certain point in the air suddenly exploded. A gust of wind swept through and soil flew everywhere. However, a cold sword ray tore through everything and went straight for Li Yuanzhu's face. Ding, ding, ding. Li Yuanzhu's expression changed slightly. She pointed her sword 3 times in a row and retreated from one end of the courtyard to the other before the sword ray dissipated. However, the aura on the other end of the courtyard wall had already gone far away. Li Yuanzhu frowned and rushed into the house, only to see that the ground had been turned upside down. Even the ground was made of fine steel, but there was a hole in one place. Xanjur and Lin Xiaola had already jumped down. Lin Yu was still standing there eating melon seeds and obviously hadn't recovered yet. Follow me, Li Yuanzhu said before jumping down. Lin Yu touched her head, looked upstairs and then at her feet. She pondered for a moment before jumping down. It would take a long time to describe, but everything happened in an instant. It was about 20 meters underground. She jumped down and saw Xanjur and Lin Xiaola. There were 6 paths in front of them, or it could be said that the bottom of the house was just one of the nodes of these paths. Which direction? Xanjur's face was gloomy. Her fist was bleeding profusely, but it was as if she didn't feel anything. Lin Xiaola sniffled and sniffled again. Finally, she lay on the ground and sniffled. She raised her head with a puzzled expression. There's no smell of that guy. But the most recent smell is heading in that direction. Without saying a word, Xanjur chased after the passageway that Lin Xiaola had pointed out. After chasing for an hour, the group saw a ray of light ahead of them, and the sound of water followed. Rushing out, they found themselves beside a waterfall. Where should we go? Xanjur asked again. The smell is gone. It seems to have stopped here. Xanjur's face was filled with doubt. Water. Li Yuanzhu was the first to react. Lin Yu followed behind the 3 of them, deep in thought. What are they going to do? Prince Zhao was still upstairs. At this moment, Rinpoche was smiling, but it was a bitter smile. He heard Li Yuanzhu shout, Su Wuming. He also heard Xanjur smashing the metal plate downstairs. He also knew that everyone had jumped into a hole in the ground. However, he didn't dare to say a word. Everyone was simply too fast. Before he could think of a way to spread the news that he was here, they had already disappeared. The other party had used some unknown method to conceal their auras, and even Li Yuanzhu didn't realize that they were upstairs. Everyone subconsciously thought that they had been caught and escaped through the tunnel. Brother, you are still quite obedient. A charming and seductive voice rang in Rinpoche's ear. The face that was next to his slowly moved away, and the jade-like hand that was stuck on his neck was slowly released. The hand was beautiful. It was as if it was carved out of white jade. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that it was a jade-like hand. If this was the most beautiful hand in the world, Rinpoche would consider it and nod in agreement. The fingernails on the hand were also very long, at least 2 centimeters long. There weren't any flaws at all, and it was obvious that the owner took great care of them. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to do this. Although Rinpoche didn't see it, he could imagine that there wouldn't be a speck of dust on such long fingernails. With such a beautiful hand and flawless fingernails, the owner must be very beautiful as well. She was breathtakingly beautiful. Rinpoche had to admit that he always met beautiful women. For example, the Empress, Li Yuanzhu, Lin Yu, Xanjur, and the cross-dresser, However, the woman in front of him was still breathtakingly beautiful. Purple eyeshadow was still very rare in this world. She had loose bangs, red lips that were like flames, a pair of phoenix eyes that were somewhat similar to the Empress's, and there was a mole at the corner of her eye. All of these combined to form a woman that made Rinpoche feel breathtakingly beautiful. Most importantly, she was protruding forward and concave back. Just now, Rinpoche felt that he had dribbled the ball into someone. He had to say that it was a good ball. However, Rinpoche felt that the most breathtakingly beautiful thing wasn't the beauty of this woman, but the smell of her pink fingernails. It was a sweet and intoxicating smell. He didn't need to think to know that it was poisonous, and it was extremely poisonous. He didn't know if the other party would have died if he had made any strange moves just now, but he was definitely going to die. At this moment, she pulled her face away and looked at Rinpoche with a smile. "Hello, big sister." Rinpoche looked as obedient and well-behaved as a harmless young man could be. Unfortunately, he forgot that he had a fierce face, a bald head and no eyebrows. Inexplicably, he thought of the time when he first met the Empress. It seemed like he had to survive in a desperate situation again. "It's been a long time since someone called me big sister." The woman touched her face and sighed. Slap. Rinpoche was stunned by the sudden slap. A wave of anger rose from the soles of his feet to the top of his head, and a fierce look flashed in his eyes. However, he calmed down in the blink of an eye. He swung his hand and slapped himself. The woman opened her small mouth slightly and was obviously a little surprised. Just now, both sides weren't very symmetrical. "This looks better." Rinpoche smiled. The woman smiled and looked at him with interest as if she was re-examining him. Then she turned around in front of Rinpoche and asked, "Am I beautiful?" "Who said that you aren't beautiful? You must be blind." "I'm not blind." Rinpoche replied honestly. "Therefore, I can't say that you aren't beautiful." "Then between me and Xiao, who is more beautiful?" The woman's eyes were full of expectation as if she was a young girl waiting for her sweetheart to praise her. However, Rinpoche knew that this person in front of him wasn't easy to deal with. In fact, apart from Lin Yu, whose brain circuit was like the Mariana Trench, and Lin Xiaola, who could increase her cultivation level in her sleep, no one who could cultivate to this level was easy to deal with. Furthermore, this was a fatal question. "I know of a mirror. As long as you ask it, Magic Mirror, who is the most beautiful person in the world, it will tell you," Rinpoche said. "I think it will definitely tell you that you are the most beautiful person in the world." "Do you mean that I'm more beautiful than Xiao?" The woman's eyes were slightly sarcastic. "I mean, if someone else were to ask it, it would say the same thing. Otherwise, it would have been smashed long ago." Rinpoche spread his hands. Slap. As soon as he finished speaking, Rinpoche received another slap. The woman first slapped him, then gently stroked his cheek as if she was caressing her lover's cheek. "Does it hurt?" Rinpoche gritted his teeth. This woman was simply a crazy knife. He then smiled and said, "I don't think I lost out. I think all the men in the world are willing to take this slap." "It's good that you're not angry." The woman smiled happily. "You are so obedient that I can't bear to hit you." Chapter 942. Although the woman said this, Rinpoche knew that he wouldn't die for the time being. Otherwise he would have died just now. Since the other party didn't kill him immediately, it meant that there was something on him that she wanted. The problem was how important the thing she wanted was to her. Otherwise she could still kill him at any time. Rinpoche wasn't too worried about this since he had too many things in his mind. The next problem was, how could he survive and find a way to escape from his opponent? He had to do it within 4 days. This was because he would be returning to Earth in 4 days. Think about it. If he suddenly disappeared, the other party would be confused. If he suddenly appeared and saw the other party's face, he would be confused. Overall, Rinpoche analyzed the situation and realized that there was good news and bad news. The good news was that he had found the person behind the scenes. The bad news was he was caught by the other party. In any case, he had found the person behind the scenes, right? At least he found some clues. Half of the purpose of coming here was accomplished. The other half was how to go back alive and turn around to find a big treasure. If something went wrong, the Empress would really become a widow. Rinpoche thought about it and smiled. The more this was the time, the more he had to smile. "How should I address you, big sister?" As soon as he finished speaking, he felt a stinging pain on his face. "Aren't you going to ask why I hit you?" The woman smiled brightly. "A woman like you can be forgiven no matter what you do. Since I have to forgive you, why ask?" Rinpoche's face was burning, but his expression didn't change at all. He was smiling as brightly as the other party. At this point he was completely in the zone. He had thrown aside his identity and the pampered life he had been living for the past few years. Now he just wanted to survive and find a chance to escape. As for revenge, that was something to be done after he escaped. "I'm starting to understand why Qi Zixiao likes you," the woman suddenly said. Rinpoche smiled and didn't say anything. "I've seen a lot of shameless people and I've also seen a lot of two-faced people, but it's really rare to see someone like you," the woman said faintly. "As for my name, it's fine to tell you so that you can die without knowing. Yun Yuhan. I don't think anyone knows this name." Rinpoche was moved. No one knew this name? In other words, he wasn't on the expert ranking? Was it because the other party had used a pseudonym, or was there some other reason? There was no need for Yun Yuhan to give him a fake name at a time like this. Yun Yuhan should be his real name. What? Su Wuming was there, but this person wasn't? It had always been a mystery who created the ranking of the world experts. It was only known that it would appear every year. And this organization was also a mystery. Are these two the same organization? The other party created Su Wuming as a face to walk the world and hid the others? Why were these experts willing to do this? They hid their identities just to prevent people like him, who wanted to leave the banished land, from appearing? For the sake of his own life, Rinpoche's brain was working at high speed. He was able to analyze so much from just one sentence from her. "You don't seem to be afraid? Do you think they can come back and save you?" The woman looked at Rinpoche's expression and smiled. "If that was possible, you and I wouldn't be here now," Rinpoche said calmly. "You're a smart person. It's a pity that you only look smart but do stupid things." The woman shook her head slightly. She grabbed Rinpoche by the neck, broke the window and ran into the distance. They made a few turns along the way, ran along the river for more than 5 kilometers and returned to land. After another hour they arrived at a small manor. Strong winds blew all the way, and their speed wasn't much slower than the Empress's. Rinpoche estimated that it took them 5.5 hours to travel at a speed of about 350 kilometers per hour, which was more than 1,600 kilometers. Including the detours along the way, the straight-line distance was more than 800 kilometers. The direction was probably to the north, near the border with Great Xia. At this distance, Li Yuanzhu and the others definitely wouldn't be able to find him. Rinpoche began to worry. If he was imprisoned in this place, he would really be done for. He would definitely be discovered going back and forth to Earth. Even if he used words to fool them, it could only be done once, twice, or thrice. Perhaps they would be brought to Earth by him. That would be really troublesome. What kind of people were in this manor? How long would he be imprisoned? How would they treat him after finding out his secret? Rinpoche went through all of these in his mind. All the options were passive, and his life was in the hands of others. Not only was his life in their hands, but what about the Empress? If they really made a move, would the Empress be a match for them? At the thought of this, the sense of crisis in Rinpoche's heart intensified. He had to find a way to change the situation. When Yun Yuhan landed in the courtyard, people immediately greeted her from afar. They were all young men in their 30s or 40s, and they seemed to be very respectful to her. Seeing this scene, Rinpoche suddenly had an idea. She was a woman, and a very powerful one at that. She was a woman with a high status. He only had one active way to turn defeat into victory, and that was to woo her. This idea suddenly came to Rinpoche's mind. Just because I'm so handsome. Rinpoche thought about it and felt that the most important thing for a person was still talent. He couldn't always rely on his looks to make a living. Yun Yuhan threw him into a side room and said with a smile, "Stay here for now. Don't even think about escaping. With your strength, you won't be able to escape. The treatment is better than I thought." Rinpoche looked around. He then looked at Yun Yuhan and asked, "How are you going to treat me next? What do you want to know from me? Let me say this first, don't think about torturing me. I'm afraid of pain. You can consider seducing me. Maybe I'll confess." Yun Yuhan smiled as she watched Rinpoche's performance. She moved closer to Rinpoche and directly rammed him with the ball. 2 soft mounds on her chest and a delicate fragrance assailed his nostrils. "How do you want to seduce you?" Her soft words directly blew into Rinpoche's ears with hot air. Rinpoche deliberately took a step back and said, "First, tell me what you want since you didn't kill me and brought me here." Yun Yuhan followed closely behind and gently blew into his ear. "Now that there's no one to disturb us, you and I have time to talk." Seeing that she was sticking close to him, Rinpoche made up his mind and lowered his head slightly. A man and a woman alone in a room. Why don't we do something more meaningful? What do you want to do? Yun Yuhan asked with a cold look in her eyes. For example, dance? To be able to dance with a woman like you, I wouldn't trade it even if I became an immortal. Rinpoche reached out to grab Yun Yuhan's hands. Her movements were a little unnatural and Rinpoche noticed it. He immediately knew that she was a paper tiger. However, she wanted to see what tricks he was playing, so she let him grab her hands. You wouldn't trade it even if you became an immortal? Yun Yuhan said in a charming voice full of ridicule. What's there to die for? I'm willing to be a mandarin duck and not envy immortals. Mandarin ducks are really enviable. Don't you see me when I come and go? I hate embroidery of a lone luan on the curtain so that I can paste a pair of swallows on the door curtain. Swallows fly around the painted beam, and the curtain is covered with tulips. Patches of clouds touch the hair of cicadas, and the slender moon turns yellow. As Rinpoche spoke, he put one hand on his waist and the other on his shoulder. He recited a part of Chang, an ancient meaning without the beginning and end, hummed a canon, and led her to dance in the center of the room. Yun Yuhan's eyes flickered, and she suddenly stopped smiling. She let Rinpoche lead her to dance like a puppet. It had to be said that she was much better at learning than the empress. After stepping on Rinpoche a few times, she knew what to do. Rinpoche and the empress had danced to the same song a few times, but at that time he felt sweet in his heart. At this time he was holding a soft body, but his heart was freezing cold. Both of them were smiling, but they were holding a knife in their hearts. The only difference was that Rinpoche had what she wanted, and this was what he was relying on. Other than that, everything was in her hands. On the other hand, the other party treated him like a monkey in her palm and was very interested in enjoying the novel experience that he brought. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second. Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 943. After the dance, Yun Yuhan took a step back and slapped him in the face. Stay here. Someone will come and ask you. After saying this, Yun Yuhan left the room. Rinpoche touched his cheek and felt a burning pain. His eyes were full of fierceness like a ferocious tiger, but he restrained it after a while. He had just come up with this idea and immediately made such a choice just for an opportunity. It might not necessarily be useful, and he didn't need the other party to have a good impression of him. As long as the other party hesitated at the critical moment, it would be enough. In times of survival like this, every opportunity had to be grasped. Perhaps one could save his life. Although this wasn't the only opportunity, Rinpoche always felt that he was more talented in this area. Of course, the premise was that the other party wasn't the kind of person who had seen countless men. If that was the case, Rinpoche reckoned that he would be swallowed whole. He had never felt that he was smarter than the people of this world. Except for the aboriginals. Fortunately, some of the details just now made him realize that the other party was just a paper tiger, which was good news. Yun Yuhan said that someone would come, but he didn't know who it would be. Could it be Su Wuming? How many people were there in this organization? What kind of organizational structure was it? What was Su Wuming's position in it? What about Yun Yuhan? If he took the initiative to surrender, he didn't know if he would have more opportunities. He would disappear every 7 days and this couldn't be changed. He wouldn't be able to keep up the pretense of civility for long. Would the Empress be very worried about his disappearance? He was afraid that she would go straight to the Yun Nation from Lan City, and probably do something extreme. He was still careless. While he was looking for the other party had already prepared a trap and was waiting for him to crash into it. However, the change was so fast that he and the others were caught off guard. Even if they were more careful, as long as he was still investigating this matter, it would be inevitable. Rinpoche thought about it, then found a place to close his eyes and rest while waiting for someone to come. After about half an hour, Rinpoche felt something strange around him. He opened his eyes and saw a scholar with a long beard sitting on a chair not far away, looking at him with a smile. Another spirit wheel expert, Rinpoche thought. To be able to appear in front of him without him noticing, this person was undoubtedly a spirit wheel expert. Rinpoche nodded politely and asked, "How should I address you?" When Shaoxing. The scholar smiled. Rinpoche thought for a while and realized that he hadn't seen this name on the list of experts before. It was another person who wasn't on the list. What is your purpose? Pretty much what you're thinking. Warriors of love and peace. Work hard for world peace? Rinpoche asked with a smile. The other party's smile froze for a moment. As a person who thought highly of himself, it was inevitable for his heart to waver when he was evaluated in such a manner. Then he smiled. It was not the kind of smile that seemed to be fixed on his face, but the kind that seemed to have thought of something interesting. He nodded slowly. You can say that. You have a divine weapon? With a flip of his palm, a silver-white spear appeared in front of him. When Xiaoxing looked at it carefully, and an unknown light flashed in his eyes. It's 6 feet and 3 inches long, gold and silver in color, and there are patterns of the listening rain flower on the spear body. It is indeed Ting Yu's listening rain spear. Ren Baqian's gaze froze. Even he didn't know what the pattern on the spear was, but the other party actually recognized it at a glance. With such a good understanding of Ting Yu's spear, Ren Baqian increasingly suspected that the other party was the same group of people who made the list of experts. I'm very curious as to why Ting Yu's divine weapon didn't dissipate and instead fell into your hands. I heard that before Ting Yu died he shouted, "Where's my spear?" in a voice filled with grief and indignation. It seems that this listening rain spear fell into your hands before he died. Ren Baqian's eyes flickered. The other party even knew about this matter. At that time, in addition to the aboriginals, there were some experts from the Jing tribe, and there seemed to be some commoners. The other party might have gotten the news from them. Are you really doing this for the survival of the human race? Ren Baqian asked instead of answering. That's right. You really do know. Nothing is more important than the survival of the entire race. This is righteousness. Unfortunately, there are always some people who like to do stupid things and bring the entire race to the brink of destruction. When Xiaoxing looked at Ren Baqian with regret. So, you kill the future of the human race time and time again? Ren Baqian asked with slight sarcasm. He wanted to disturb the other party's state of mind and make them doubt whether everything they did was right. At that time he would have a better chance. The future? If that future is the destruction of the entire human race. You are too arrogant. You don't know what you are facing. This isn't the only group of humans. Ren Baqian said with a faint smile, his eyes full of mockery. When Xiaoxing suddenly froze and tensed up like a creature whose tail had been stepped on. His eyes were filled with disbelief as he asked, "What did you say?" I said that the human race isn't limited to this group of people from the land of exile. 2 groups of humans escaped back then, and the other group is at the other end of the sea. Ren Baqian said calmly. After listening to Ren Baqian's words, when Xiaoxing suddenly laughed and asked, "Do you know what is in the sea? If it weren't for your last sentence, I would have been really scared by you. It's nothing more than storms and beasts." Ren Baqian was actually relying on guessing, but when it came to the sea he only knew about these things. Do you know about submarines? Do you know about ironclad ships? Do you know about satellite navigation? Do you know about Yamato warships? Do you know about SOD? Ren Baqian threw out a bunch of words that the other party couldn't understand before saying calmly, "You are just a group of people with limited vision and thinking. You hide in your own world and live in fear. You think that you are doing this for the entire human race, but in fact, you are just pitiful people who are afraid of everything." His expression was arrogant, as if the person in front of him wasn't a spirit wheel expert who could easily crush him, but a dog that could be seen everywhere. The other party didn't care about his expression and just stared blankly at Ren Baqian as if he was shocked by his series of words that he didn't understand. "You, that's right. I'm a pioneer who came from that land. In fact, it's not just me. We have sent dozens of people out over the years, and each time, we split up and went in different directions to search for One Piece. You are just an unexpected gain for me. We have done far more than you can imagine. We can communicate with each other over long distances, and each of us can know what is happening in our land at any time. We have weapons that can destroy the world. We have eliminated the Zerg and the Protoss, and our next goal is to recapture our homeland. When I set foot on this land and found you who share the same bloodline as us, I was shocked by your backwardness. You haven't developed for thousands of years and are even weaker than before." Ren Baqian's face was full of pride, deeply proud of the land he was on. It's really hard to imagine that as humans, you have fallen so far. Ren Baqian shook his head slightly, and his eyes were full of resentment. What makes it even harder for me to imagine is that in this land, there is actually a group of people like you who think that they are righteous, but have actually become a cancer. As for Wen Xiaoxing, his face was full of confusion. Chapter 944. When Xiaoxing's eyes flickered. Ren Baqian's words had a great impact on his worldview. Ren Baqian's gaze made him feel like he was a fool. Nonsense. When Xiaoxing used all his strength to open his mouth and spit out 4 words. A bunch of nonsense? Rinpoche was arrogant and looked at Wen Shaoxing as if he was looking at a lousy person. He said, "You're all a bunch of losers." Although Wen Shaoxing did not know what this word meant, he could imagine that it was not something good. The world has changed. Can't you see it? Can't you see the war between Dayo and Great Xia and the Yun nation? Can't you see those weapons that have never appeared before? Why were Dayo's troop movements, joint attacks and pincer attacks so accurate? Why is Dayo's army able to be commanded so easily? Are you guys blind? Of course, those things may be beyond your imagination. I can only say that your imagination can't keep up with reality. Rinpoche's face was full of pity. Wen Shaoxing only felt a stuffiness in his chest, making him almost unable to breathe. He was indeed studying the changes in Dayo's army. However, Rinpoche's words were like a hot knife stabbing into his chest. He couldn't even imagine what others could do. How sorrowful was this? Lan City has become a city that never sleeps. I'm sure all of you have heard about the chandeliers that cover the entire city. Don't you know anything about the forging factories built all over the Chuyin mine? These are only the most superficial techniques. However, if you want to develop them on your own, with your state of not making any progress for thousands of years, I'm afraid it will take hundreds or even thousands of years. Those glasses, mirrors, these little things that I took out casually, yet you can't even do them. What face do you have to question me? Nonsense? I think you are the ones who are ignorant. In my opinion, you are a group of primitive people surrounding a leaf. Do you know what primitive means? It was the state of eating raw meat and drinking blood before humans could use flames. You faced an enemy of the past and thought that you could not defeat it, so you begged for your lives. However, we have already reached a point that you could not even imagine. At this moment, Rinpoche was in the zone again. He was either proud, regretful, pitiful, or disdainful. He had created the image of a visitor from an advanced civilization and was looking down on the natives who were just eating and waiting to die. With Rinpoche's reprimand, Wen Shaoxing's face alternated between green and white. Finally, he spat out a mouthful of blood. His face was deathly pale as he staggered out the door. Vomiting blood? Does this person have a fragile heart? Rinpoche touched his bald head. He was obviously surprised by the power of his words. However, his sudden inspiration was not bad. No matter who was behind the other party, they would not easily make a move on him. Even if there was a hidden foreign race behind them, they would definitely find a way to find out the location and strength of the country he made up. If they were really just a bunch of brainless humans, it would be even easier to deal with them. Playing the role of a visitor from a highly civilized country that had developed for thousands of years was much more effective than playing the role of a snake or scorpion. In any case, he had so many things in his hands. Rinpoche touched his body. The grenades and sugar bags that were originally in his pocket had all been shaken off when Yun Yuhan grabbed them. After all, his reputation as a poison warrior was quite intimidating. However, it didn't matter. There were too many things that he could prove. Back then, he had always been afraid of letting others know that he was a visitor from a foreign land. Unexpectedly, he now had to work hard to make people believe that he was a visitor from a foreign land. Next, it would depend on the effect of the 10 million word outline that he had just boasted. Not long after, Rinpoche felt his vision darken. A person appeared in front of him and stared at him. It was Yun Yuhan. What did you do to Wen Shaoxing? There was no anger in Yun Yuhan's eyes, but deep doubt. I just told him some big truths. Rinpoche spread his hands. Do you want to hear it? Not interested. As for you, your life is in my hands now. You are a smart person, so you'd better behave. Yun Yuhan said slowly. Her voice was very charming and soft, but there was a chill in it. Don't worry. I'll wait for you to send me back. Rinpoche chuckled. Pa. If you die, I will send your head back and bury it with Qi Xiao. Luo Qiu shouted. Yun Yuhan laughed. Rinpoche's smile didn't change. There was a flame burning in his heart that wanted to burn the person in front of him to ashes. It's still too early to shout about killing. I'm curious about something. Have you ever tasted a man? Do you want me to try? Han's finger moved along Rinpoche's cheek, neck, and finally reached Rinpoche's shoulder blade. Following which, Rinpoche felt a sharp pain coming from his shoulder blade. His opponent's finger had forcefully pierced into the lower part of his shoulder blade. The yang boosting technique had strengthened his skin, but this finger only caused him to exert a little more strength. After piercing a knuckle, Yun Yuhan pulled her finger out, put her face close to his shoulder blade, and gently licked his wound with her tongue. Rinpoche seemed to not feel the pain and smiled even more brilliantly. Do you know that there is a saying in our world called thorny roses? Roses are the most beautiful flowers, but they have thorns. If you want to pick a rose, you will always be pricked until you bleed. Thorny roses? Very interesting. Yun Yuhan licked the blood from Rinpoche's wound. The corner of her mouth was stained with some blood, and she looked even more coquettish. After Yun Yuhan left, Rinpoche walked to the mirror and looked at himself. There was a hole in his clothes, and inside the hole was a wound as thick as a finger. After Yun Yuhan licked it, the wound actually stopped bleeding. However, Rinpoche was a little worried that he wasn't poisoned. Yun Yuhan's fingernails were all highly toxic. Perhaps this was the reason why she licked it? Was her saliva detoxifying him? Or did she have the antidote in her mouth? He had to admit that this woman was simply crazy. If he had the chance, he would kill her first. In the evening, when Shaoxing appeared in front of Rinpoche again, his face was still a little pale, but it seemed that he was fine. Seeing the wound on Rinpoche's body, when Shaoxing frowned and then smiled at him. This kind of thing won't happen again. Rinpoche playfully asked, "Is your status higher than hers?" When Shaoxing shook his head. "You will know this in the future. I can only tell you that this kind of thing won't happen again. I would like to hear you continue to talk about that continent." In fact, when Shaoxing was already 30% convinced. After all, some things could be seen. Judging from some of the aspects that Rinpoche had shown, Rinpoche was indeed not from the Yun nation, Great Xia, or the Qin nation. In that case, what he said was very likely true. Although Rinpoche was exaggerating, when Shaoxing felt that it didn't seem like a lie. Rinpoche smiled and sat there, telling him how the human race arrived on the continent of Valoran, gained a foothold on the coast of Dalmatia, fought for the next piece of land from the natives, defeated Galen, the goddess of Dalmatia, Lux, and finally unified the entire continent of Valoran. After that, the human race also developed rapidly. While they were exploring the surrounding waters, they encountered the Zerg and the Protoss, who called themselves the Protoss, and a war broke out between the three parties. In the end, the human race used nuclear weapons to destroy the Protoss Templars and won the war. However, after that, the human race discovered that the Protoss race was a race that had been driven out of One Piece, which contained a huge secret of this world. Therefore, the entire human race began the Age of Discovery and searched for the legendary One Piece. Looking at Wen Shaoxing, who was listening attentively, Rinpoche felt that he was really a web novelist who had been delayed. What you see is only a small part of this world. Rinpoche stretched out his pinky and gestured. After Rinpoche finished speaking, Wen Shaoxing was in a daze. What Rinpoche said was too exaggerated. However, it was too real. The Protoss Templars, Dark Templars, Dragon Knights, Consort, Marauders, Observers, the Zerg Zerglings, Hydralisks, King Zergs, Lurkers, Wyverns, Queen Zergs. Rinpoche's description of the abilities and appearances of these things that he had never heard of before was too realistic. It was as if they existed in this world. The human race had really encountered such enemies before. Otherwise, there was no way to create two such realistic races in such a short period of time. Not to mention the natives of the continent of Valoran. If he hadn't experienced it himself, it would have been hard for Wen Shaoxing to believe that someone could weave such a truthful lie in such a short period of time. In his heart, the truthfulness of Rinpoche's words had risen from 30% to 70%. Let me set a small goal first. Remember Zinbei. Chapter 945. When Shaoxing sat there for a long time without saying a word. His expression was very interesting. In the end, he left without saying a word. He went back to reorganize the incredible things he had heard today. In his heart, there was also a little yearning. There was another group of humans in the past? To this extent? Compared to them, they should really be ashamed. He just couldn't figure it out. They were all humans, so what kind of fortuitous encounters did they have? How did they reach their current level? That night, Rinpoche slept well. After realizing that his life was not in danger for the time being, he let go of his worries. The only thing that worried him was the Empress. He had to find a way to contact her. However, Wen Shaoxing hardly fell asleep. He spent the whole night thinking about the things that Rinpoche had described, and images formed in his mind. The next morning, Rinpoche was moved again. This time, not only Yun Yuhan but also Wen Shaoxing left with him. In this stronghold, the two of them should be the ones with the highest positions. Wen Shaoxing originally had other things to do, but what Rinpoche said was so important that it would even affect the future direction of their organization. As such, their original plans had to be temporarily postponed. Before he set off, he probed, "Send someone to inform Qi Zixiao that I'm fine." Although it was a probing question, his tone was unquestionable. After all, this was befitting of his current identity. A strange smile appeared on Yun Yuhan's face. She gently stroked Rinpoche's face with her fingers. It was cold to the touch, but it was charming and gentle to the touch. Ahem. When Xiaoxing gave a dry cough and glanced at Yuhan. Yuhan curled her lips and retracted her hand. It's not up to me to decide how to treat you. The meaning was obvious. If you can't even keep your life in the end, then there's no point in informing Qi Zixiao. If you can really move the others, then we'll talk about informing Qi Zixiao. Maybe we don't even need to inform Qi Zixiao and we can just let you go. Rinpoche smiled mockingly and asked, do you have any other choice? Curl up here and be a maggot for the rest of your life? When Xiaoxing's eyes darkened and he stopped talking, Yun Yuhan glanced at Rinpoche with a strange look. She was now curious about what Rinpoche had said to Wen Xiaoxing last night that made Rinpoche dare to speak in such a tone and Wen Xiaoxing's reaction. This journey took a full day and they still relied on their feet. The speed of a spirit wheel expert was far faster than that of an ordinary mount. However, their speed was slower than before because Wen Xiaoxing was slower than Yun Yuhan, who was carrying Rinpoche. The direction was northeast. Rinpoche had a bad feeling about this. If they headed northeast, they would be at the seaside. If it was by the sea, it would still be fine. However, if it was on a small island in the East Sea of Great Xia, no one would be able to respond to his cries. He did not dare to place all his hopes on convincing the other party. From morning to night, it took them almost 14 hours to travel more than 1,600 li. They finally arrived at a fishing village by the sea. He wondered if the organization behind the scenes in this world had the same aesthetic standards and liked to stay in the village. For example, when they were in Tianjin Basin or now. The fishing village was not small, and from the looks of it, there were at least a few hundred families. In this era, it was considered a very big village. At this time, a population of 10,000 was considered a medium-sized city. Towns generally only had a population of 2,000. The ground in the village was paved with blue stone, and there were tall trees full of white flowers planted around it. In particular, there was a tree at the head of the village that was nearly 30 meters tall. Its branches and leaves were lush, and its spreading shade covered the 7 or 8 houses around it. There were many pedestrians coming and going in the village. There were children running and jumping barefoot on the bluestone road, and there were also fishermen wearing coarse clothes and dragging fishing nets whose skin had turned black and red from the sun. When they saw Wen Xiaoxing and Yun Yuhan, everyone saluted them from afar. Rinpoche observed carefully and found that 35% of the people he saw along the way were ordinary people, 50% were man-wheel experts, and half were earth-wheel experts. The ratio could be said to be astonishing. However, after thinking about it, this was the lair of an organization, so it was very normal. In addition, there were blacksmiths, grocery stores, cloth shops, and tea houses in the village. It could be said that this was a shrunken town. Rinpoche was locked up in a courtyard in the west of the village. Yun Yuhan remained here to guard him while Wen Xiaoxing left in a hurry. In a village, an old woman and 2 old men sat above. The old woman sat in the main seat, and the other 2 sat below her to her right. Wen Xiaoxing respectfully told the 3 of them what Rinpoche had said to him. Following Wen Xiaoxing's words, the 2 old men's faces were full of bewilderment. In fact, Wen Xiaoxing's retelling wasn't as complete as Rinpoche's, so the effect was much worse. This is ridiculous. One of the old men couldn't help but reprimand him. It's indeed ridiculous. A cold light flashed in the old woman's eyes. I'm a little interested. The last old man showed a strange smile. If what he said is true, then a lot of things can be explained. Hall Master, 2 deputy Hall Masters, I feel that his words are trustworthy. That's why I brought him back to the hall. There are some things in Dayo that really can't be explained, especially the weapons that appeared in the war against Great Xia and Tianjin Basin, which we have never seen before. After that, we collected some fragments and did find a problem. Those things don't have any traces of being handmade. Also, the long-distance communication that he mentioned should also exist. We didn't think of it before, but now, combined with what he said, the precise mobilization and cooperation of the Dayo army in these wars can be explained. What do you mean by bringing him back? The old woman asked with a cold face. Summon all the deputy chiefs and above to decide our future. Wen Xiaoxing lowered his head and said respectfully. How dare you? Who do you think you are, Wen Xiaoxing? The old man who reprimanded him earlier shouted angrily. Of course, I'm a member of the Temple of Heaven. I don't think there's anything wrong with this proposal. If what he said is true, then we are really frogs in a well and everything we have done has become a joke. Grandmaster, Do you think those nonsense dream talk are true? The old woman asked with a cold face. Maybe it's true, maybe it's false. Either way, this is a big deal. If what he said is true, then it won't just affect us but the entire human race. Have the two of you forgotten what the purpose of the Temple of Heaven is? Such an important matter, of course, must be decided by everyone. To be honest, I hope that what he said is true, but I don't know why the two of you have such a big reaction. The old man who was called Chief smiled. I just think that it's complete nonsense and not credible. It's ridiculous to put aside all other matters and summon all the deputy chiefs just for this nonsense. The old man who reprimanded him earlier said resentfully. What if what he said is true? What if he can produce evidence? That kid is full of doubts, so it's better not to make a decision too quickly, Chief said with a smile. The momentum of the other two suddenly stagnated. Why don't we gather all the honored ones first and decide whether to summon all the deputy chiefs back immediately? This matter involves the future of the entire human race. Since ancient times, the Temple of Heaven has been watching the changes in the world with cold eyes. What we do is to protect the human race. This is a righteous cause. In other words, the Temple of Heaven is not a temple for one person or one sect, but for everyone. Now that something that can affect the future of the entire human race has appeared, it's natural for everyone to make a decision together. Chief repeated. The old woman stared at him a few times and let out a long sigh. You're right. This matter needs to be decided by everyone. Ring the heavenly bell and summon all the honored ones to discuss together. Old friend, set a small goal first. Chapter 946. Rinpoche was resting in the house, wondering how he could find an opportunity to contact the Empress. At this moment, he heard the sound of a bell coming from the center of the village. Yun Yuhan, who was leaning against the door, changed her expression slightly. It's the 12th ring. All the venerables are coming out of seclusion. They actually value you so much. Rinpoche opened his eyes and smiled. Yesterday I asked you if you wanted to know what I said to Wen Shaoxing. It's too late for you to know now. Yun Yuhan walked over to Rinpoche and said, How can it be too late? Unless you don't want to say. Rinpoche stroked her face with his finger. I really don't have any interest in talking about it now. Yun Yuhan's arm moved and then stopped. Her palm stopped a few centimeters away from Rinpoche's face, and he could feel the wind from her palm. Don't be so impatient. It won't look good if your face is swollen. Rinpoche smiled and pushed her hand away. Yun Yuhan twisted her body and walked back to lean against the door frame. Rinpoche didn't know what Wen Shaoxing said to her, but it did have some effect. 2 hours later, Wen Shaoxing returned and said, Come with me. The temple chief and the venerables want to see you. Rinpoche nodded, tidied up his clothes, got up and walked out with Wen Shaoxing. The speed of the other party was unexpectedly fast, which showed that they valued him a lot. This gave him a lot of confidence. What's the name of your organization? Rinpoche asked casually on the way. Temple of Heaven. Probably because there was no need to hide his identity now, Wen Shaoxing spoke frankly. What are venerables? The abdicated temple chief will become venerables. Rinpoche nodded. Temple chief, venerables, temple chief. It seemed that the other party did have a lot of experts. Are you a temple chief? Yes. During the 10-minute journey, Rinpoche got a lot of information from Wen Shaoxing. It seemed that Wen Shaoxing no longer hid anything after arriving at their lair. This organization was called the Temple of Heaven. It was said that a group of people formed it after the human race retreated here. Its purpose was to protect the human race. However, some things happened later. Some people discovered that not only did the human race not recover their strength, but they were also constantly weakening. From then on, the Temple of Heaven knew that if there were no major changes, the human race wouldn't be able to leave the land of exile. From then on, the Temple of Heaven had another task, which was to ensure that no one left the land of exile. The Temple of Heaven was divided into 8 sub-halls, with about 10,000 people. The other party didn't mention the number of venerables, but Su Wuming was one of them. The so-called Temple of Heaven was not above ground, but underground. There was a sea god temple at the back of the village. From the back of the sea god temple, there was a passage that led diagonally down a few hundred steps. Then there was a passage lined with oil lamps on both sides. After walking for a few hundred meters, they finally arrived at a huge space. Dozens of tall statues were situated in this space, forming a circle. Each statue was 10 meters tall. They were either holding a book, a long sword, or a spear. Each statue was like a fierce warrior who fought against the heavens and earth, inspiring respect. Rinpoche counted silently. There were a total of 42 statues. 17 of the statues had a person sitting on their shoulders. There were both men and women, and almost all of them were elderly. These people were the venerables and deputy temple masters of the Temple of Heaven. In other words, there were at least 14 venerables in the Temple of Heaven. He wondered if Su Wuming was among them. When Shaoxing brought Rinpoche to the center of the hall, bowed to the statues in front of him and said, "Temple Master, Deputy Temple Master, Venerables, I have brought him here. Go back to your seat." The voice of an old woman was heard. When Shaoxing moved, landed on one of the shoulders and sat down cross-legged. Rinpoche looked at the tall statues in front of him. If he wanted to see everyone clearly, he had to look up. He then lowered his eyelids and chuckled. "Everyone, this isn't the way to treat a guest. I don't have the habit of looking up at others." "Kid, what did you say?" an old man asked. His voice was like a big bell that reverberated in this space, causing pain in the eardrums. There was also a kind of power that made people fearful. If it were someone else, they might really be in awe. However, Rinpoche had been through the market of Daeyo's imperial court and was immune to this kind of situation. In Daeyo's imperial court, there were two things that needed to be done to suppress others. The louder the voice and the bigger the fist. Rinpoche remained unmoved and said, "You need to maintain a minimum level of respect for a guest from another group of humans, a civilization that far surpasses yours, and a person who can bring you a future. You think that you control my life, but I control your future." Rinpoche wasn't moved at all. As soon as he said this, the atmosphere in the hall immediately changed, and many of the venerables looked surprised. In fact, many people still didn't know what was going on. The bell rang 12 times, indicating that something important had happened and that everyone needed to make a decision together. This kind of thing was rare in the history of the Tiandao Alliance. The last time it happened was 100 years ago, when a group of warriors who were preparing to leave the land of exile were killed. Li Fu only knew that Su Wuming had killed a group of people. In fact, there were also venerables who went to eliminate the experts in other places. "You are very bold," the old woman said. "It's just a reasonable request." Rinpoche laughed and then raised his voice. "Everyone, let me reintroduce myself. I'm Zhao, Prince Consort of Daeyo. Of course, this is only a part of me. In addition, I'm a descendant of another group of humans who left the Lansang region. I'm a member of the League of Legends and the captain of the One Piece exploration team, Nico Robin. I need treatment that matches my identity." The air suddenly froze as Rinpoche spoke. The dozen or so venerables were shocked. With their cultivation and status, as well as their many years of experience, it could be said that nothing could make them lose their composure. However, after hearing Rinpoche's words, everyone couldn't keep calm. "What did you say?" It wasn't one person who spoke, but several people who questioned him at the same time. Rinpoche spread out his hands and asked, "Do you still want me to look up and talk to you? The 42 statues here are the 42 seniors who founded the Temple of Heaven back then." A gentle voice said. "So, it didn't stop you from stepping on them? Or do you want to come down?" Rinpoche smiled kindly. "How dare you?" An aura came pressing down from the sky like a mountain trying to suppress Rinpoche. Rinpoche smiled and wasn't moved at all. Another aura came from the sky and protected Rinpoche. "Ningyu Jiang, this isn't in line with how we treat our guests." "What kind of guest is he?" "He's just a kid full of nonsense." "Whether I'm full of nonsense or not isn't something you can decide alone." Rinpoche said at the right time, "Whether I'm talking nonsense or not, there will always be a way to prove it. Don't you even have the courage to face it? Or are some of you afraid of something?" "Ridiculous. Ningyu Jiang." After the old lady stopped Ningyu Jiang, she slowly said, "Each of these 42 statues represents an ancestor who founded the Temple of Heaven. The reason why we are standing here is that each of us has inherited the will of an ancestor. However, as you said, you are a very important guest. If what you said is proven to be true, then you naturally deserve to be treated with courtesy. If what you said is proven to be false, you definitely won't be able to bear our anger. Now I'll give you a choice. Do you still want to be treated in accordance with your status? I can tell you that if you are honest now, it's not too late." Rinpoche sneered in his heart. "Child's play. If I show my cowardice now, doesn't that mean that my words can't be trusted?" He immediately opened his mouth to speak, but at this moment, there was a slight tingling in the back of his head as if he had been bitten by something. Rinpoche opened his mouth, and his expression suddenly changed because he realized that he couldn't make a sound. The old lady in the distance looked at him mockingly. However, it was only for a moment before Rinpoche spoke again. I want treatment in accordance with my status. The old lady's expression immediately changed. How was this possible? Did the soul worm fail? One had to know that the soul worm could transform between real and fake, enter the sea of knowledge of others and control their consciousness. It was an extremely precious thing in the world. It didn't exist in this land of exile at all. Out of the 3 that were left behind, only one remained after so many years. This was an important matter, so she took it out to use, but it actually failed? At this moment, on a planet in Rinpoche's Sea of Knowledge, a thumb-sized worm streaked across the sky like a gray line. Looking at the ocean, mountains, plains, forests, rivers, the worm's eyes were filled with confusion. Where is this? Is this the sea of knowledge of a human? How can it be so big? Where is the pearl? I'm lost. Set a small goal first, such as, remember in 1 second. Shukju Mobile. Chapter 947. Choking with Sobs. Novel. The old woman thought that she could control him, but she didn't expect that she would fail. This made her a little absent-minded. Because she was too confident in the soul worm, she did not prepare any backup plans. On the other hand, Rinpoche didn't know that he had escaped a calamity. After realizing that he was fine, he relaxed. I demand treatment befitting of my status. Rinpoche looked straight ahead and said faintly. He didn't look at anyone and just calmly scanned the setups in his line of sight. He didn't want to raise his head to look at others. Although he didn't have such a taboo and didn't have such an arrogant ego, he needed it at this moment. Give him a spot. The old woman came back to her senses. Her expression was unsightly, but she still had to control herself so that others wouldn't notice anything unusual. She looked around the hall and realized that it was too late to arrange a seat for Rinpoche. As such, she could only use the statues in the hall. The deputy hall master of the Birdine Hall is dead. You can speak from there. Rinpoche turned his head and looked around. When Shaoxing pointed to the side and said, Here. It was at the outermost part of the hall. If the 46 statues were said to have a higher status as they moved inwards, then when Shaoxing's and Rinpoche's statues were located on both sides of the door, they were also the 2 statues with the lowest status. However, the height was the same. Rinpoche climbed up the statue with his legs and arms. He exerted quite a bit of strength under his feet. This statue was indeed very sturdy. He didn't even manage to step on a single piece of gravel. Are you the chief of Kain Temple? Rinpoche asked Wen Shaoxing. Yes. Wen Shaoxing closed his eyes and responded lightly. Wen Shaoxing was the chief of Kain Temple and had appeared in the Yun Nation. It seemed like Kain Temple was in charge of a part of the Yun Nation. As for the Vice Hall Master, he didn't know if he died at the hands of Vice Protector General Wu Kai or the 2 commandants. However, this was as far as he could go. He hadn't protected himself yet, so it wasn't time to dig up the past. Rinpoche looked up at the people in front of him and started to taunt them. I am shocked by your depravity and incompetence. The moment he said that, the others were instantly enraged. As members of the Heavenly Law Union's upper echelons, when had they ever been ridiculed like this? A powerful aura lingered in the sky above the hall. It was as if a huge wave would crash down at any time, smashing Rinpoche's body into pieces. Let me reintroduce myself. I come from another branch of the human race. It was an accident that allowed me to discover you. Rinpoche ignored the auras and continued speaking. The aura in the air suddenly stagnated. You came from another human race? What proof do you have? Where is the other branch of the human race? How did you get here? How many people do you have? For the crowd, they could put aside their previous disrespect and even pretend that they didn't hear it. These were the things they desperately wanted to know. Of course there is evidence. In fact, you can already guess a thing or two from the new weapons that appeared during the war between Dayo Great Xia and Tianjin Basin. There's also Dayo's long-distance communication technology. Without the need for carrier pigeons, they can speak from thousands of kilometers away. Not to mention there were also steam cars, forging machines and other new production processes. But it seems like you guys are very ill-informed. Or as I said before, weakness and ignorance have limited your imagination. Rinpoche continued to mock them mercilessly. Of course, it's actually very easy for you to see the evidence. Unfortunately, when I stepped into the trap, your people threw away all the things I had on me. Otherwise, I would be able to prove it now. In the end, you still can't prove it, someone said in a deep voice. No. You don't know what quantum transmission is. In fact, you don't even know what quantum is. However, this technology isn't perfect at the moment, and it takes some time for a round trip. That's why I'm talking to you first. I don't know what you're talking about, but you have to prove that what you said is true first. There's another branch of the human race in this world, and you are also from there, the old woman in the center said with a cold look in her eyes. It seems like you really want to prove that everything I said is false? Rinpoche asked with a faint smile. Logically speaking, as a member of the human race, you should feel happy and excited to hear this news, but your reaction seems a little strange? The old woman's face turned cold. After all, what you said is too unbelievable and we have to be cautious. Being cautious doesn't mean denying it. Rinpoche said non-committally. Everyone here can tell whether what I said is true or not, right? I always thought that being able to live to this age you wouldn't be living like a dog. Even if you aren't smart, you can still tell whether a person's words are true or not. Furthermore, you will always have the opportunity to verify it. Did you lose anything before we verified the authenticity of the information? Rinpoche's words made everyone frown and their blood surge. There didn't seem to be anything wrong with what he said, but his words were really too unpleasant. They couldn't help but want to slap him to death. Rinpoche sneered in his heart. Sometimes people were so cheap. The more polite you were, the more they felt that you had something to ask of them and the more untrustworthy you were. The more you despised them and trampled on them, the more they felt that your words were trustworthy. In particular, he had to play the role of these people. Back then, the human race retreated step by step and you retreated to this land of exile. The foreign races also focused their attention on you. In addition to you, there was another group of people in hiding. There weren't many experts among them, so they didn't attract much attention. Everyone nodded. According to some of the information that had been passed down, the battle was very fierce. In a short period of time, both sides suffered great losses. The human race began to retreat, while the foreign races pressed in wave after wave. Under such circumstances, it was normal for some survivors to wander outside and not be noticed. Although the foreign races were powerful, they weren't large in number. After the foreign races chased the human race to the land of exile, they would return to deal with the survivors. Our ancestors also knew that what awaited them in the end was destruction. It just so happened that they weren't far from the sea, so they built some wooden boats and went out to sea to hide. They first arrived at some islands and stayed there for a few days to reinforce the hastily made boats. Then they went all the way east. Along the way they went through many hardships, fought against the heavens and finally arrived at the chaotic Star Sea with a little bit of luck. Tens of thousands of people set out, but only half of them made it to the chaotic Star Sea. What kind of place is the chaotic Star Sea? Someone asked after listening to Rinpoche. The chaotic Star Sea is a place where humans and foreign races mix. In fact, some people arrived there long before that and left behind descendants, Rinpoche continued. With the help of a senior named Han Pao Pao in the chaotic Star Sea, many of our ancestors recuperated there for several years. However, as its name suggests, the chaotic Star Sea is too chaotic. There are many forces and killing is common. During this period, someone accidentally obtained a sea map to the continent of Valoran. Finally, some people decided to set out again to find their legendary new home. Rinpoche added, "This is the beginning of the rise of another branch of the human race." Rise. Everyone repeated this word. If what Rinpoche said was true, then the number of humans who came to the land of exile was even smaller. Now that thousands of years had passed, had the human race in the land of exile risen? No. Although the population had increased by 10,000 times, the overall strength of the human race was probably inferior to the original tens of thousands of people. They really couldn't imagine what Rinpoche meant by rise. What was the current branch of the human race like? Only when Shaoxing was looking forward to it. After all, the feeling of being stabbed in the heart several times and beginning to doubt life couldn't be enjoyed by only himself. It was truly good for everyone. Furthermore, he really wanted to see their expressions in a while. Baidu search 881 Chinese network yen. No advertising words. Chapter 948. Novel Yes Rise. Rinpoche repeated. Do you know what's the biggest difference between us and you? Rinpoche asked. Do you know what's the biggest difference between us and you? You're willing to hide in a corner and even bind yourselves for fear of bringing disaster upon yourselves. You even regard this as your responsibility and goal. Ridiculous. Let me ask you this. Are you willing? Is this what you thought when you joined the Temple of Heaven? Is this what you wish for? For thousands of years, this has been the case for generations. Are you willing before you die? No. Although I don't know you, I can say that everyone wants to see the vast world outside. No one likes to be imprisoned in a cage. Enough. You don't understand our situation at all. This is the land of exile and there's no hope of recovery here. Someone shouted angrily. Rinpoche chuckled to himself. These words placed him outside the group of people from the land of exile. In other words, regardless of whether the other party had made a mistake, his attitude and interrogation had worked. This is the land of exile, but the outside world isn't. Rinpoche said faintly. Since you're waiting to die of old age here, why don't you fight to the death and find another way to go overseas? You might have gained something after thousands of years. Do you think we haven't done it? Although I don't know how you passed through the turbulence layer, how many lives have we lost over the years? So you gave up? Rinpoche's heart skipped a beat. The turbulence layer, as the name suggested, should be an ocean with a lot of turbulence. However, to be able to stop so many experts, there should be other reasons besides the turbulence. Do you think our survival fell from the sky? It's undeniable that luck did play a role in our arrival in the chaotic star sea. However, how many times have we passed since then? It was all achieved through the concerted efforts of everyone. When has the human race ever been strong? Whether it was in the Lansong territory, the chaotic star sea, or even the Zerg and the Protoss, we were always at a disadvantage. The human race is a weak race. Rinpoche announced loudly. Other races are born at the man-wheel level or even earth-wheel level. The entire race can communicate directly with each other through telepathy or maximize the use of allocated resources in exchange for the strength of the entire race. Even the most common vicious beast could learn to run within a month or two of birth, and could learn to hunt within half a year. Only the human race had a low starting point, slow growth, and weak talent. Could be said that they had nothing. Greed, jealousy, laziness, internal strife, and all sorts of other evil deeds are not lacking. Following Rinpoche's words, some people were deep in thought while others looked angry. They had to admit that what Rinpoche said was right. Even if he wanted to refute, he couldn't say anything. More importantly, everyone wanted to hear what Rinpoche had to say. The smile on Rinpoche's face disappeared as he shouted at the top of his lungs. So what? Now that the Zergs and the Protoss have fallen, the Valoran continent is under the rule of the entire human race. We explore the 4 seas, we conquer the skies, we soar in the sky, we defeat powerful opponents, we explore the most fundamental mysteries of this world. This is what the weakest of humans can do. After Rinpoche shouted, he paid attention to everyone's expressions and aura. He realized that it wasn't as infectious as he had imagined. It seemed like there wasn't enough foreshadowing. Rinpoche reflected on himself. There was no other way. He had never done such a thing in his life and needed to arouse the emotions of others. He had no experience. However, it was still not too late. Rinpoche took 2 deep breaths to calm himself down. I hate the idea that all of you return everything to the land of exile and the turbulence. This is a form of cowardice and incompetence. You have to know that the world is there and we can't let it change for us. We have to change everything. Then he lowered his voice and continued, when our ancestors arrived at the Valoran continent from the chaotic star sea, it wasn't a fertile land. There were aboriginals, foreign races, and disputes. The entire human race only had a little more than 10,000 people. Furthermore, there were no experts. Rinpoche emphasized. Just like what I've said before, they're just a group of survivors who have been temporarily forgotten and thought to be irrelevant to the overall situation. There were no experts. The strongest among them was only at the earth-wheel level. They were inferior to you. Everyone was surprised to hear this. No experts. How did they survive then? Putting everything else aside, just the huge beasts in the sea alone could easily destroy tens of thousands of people. However, the fact is that we survived. Rinpoche smiled. Not only did we survive, but we also became stronger and stronger. Of course, we were like you at the beginning and hid in a corner. The first thing we had to do was to survive. While surviving, we constantly thought of ways to understand everything about that continent and adapt to its rules. The most important thing was war and technology. War made us fearless of bloodshed and united. War made us strong, made us progress, made us suffer, and sublimated our spirits. War and struggle are the most beautiful gestures of human beings. If war is a gesture, then technology is the foundation of everything. The development of technology has enriched our supplies. Technology allows us to become stronger without any strong individual strength. Cold weapons, firearms, explosives, cannons, tanks, fighter jets, bombers, warships, aircraft carriers, nuclear weapons. Rinpoche spoke quickly and kept throwing out nouns that no one had ever heard of. He didn't need to explain to everyone what these nouns meant. He just needed to make them feel that they didn't understand. We are on a completely different path from you. We don't have experts or the strong, and we don't have the glory of the past. We have to rely on ourselves and these technologies to defeat powerful enemies. Rinpoche took a deep breath and began to tell everyone about the most important war that lasted for 100 years, the Battle of Summoner's Canyon. It praised the heroes who made outstanding contributions: Ying Zheng, Bai Qi, Lu Bang, Xiangyu, Wang Jian, Liu Bei, Cao Cao, Guanyu, Zhang Fei, Zhang Shutua, Su Xiling, Ko Zhong, Yuan Huaji, Shan Xiongxin. He also listed the heroes of the foreign races on the continent of Valoran. He also listed some key battles such as the Battle of Hulao Pass and the Battle of Guandu. The former was basically the Qin dynasty, the Three Kingdoms, and the Sui and Tang dynasties. The Sui and Tang dynasties were even magically modified, the twin dragons of the Tang dynasty. Every name of these people is remembered by every descendant. They didn't have the strength of you. They might not be strong, but they all made outstanding contributions in that 100-year war. They were the first batch of achievers of the League of Legends. It was to commemorate the heroes in the war that the League of Legends was established. Rinpoche didn't forget that he was a member of the League of Legends. He conveniently raised the level of the League of Legends by several levels. It was during that century-long war that our technology began to develop rapidly. New technologies and equipment began to appear, and the entire human race also underwent tremendous changes. Telephones, television, computers, numerically controlled machine tools, energy technology, material technology, biotechnology, information technology, and even breeding technology, agricultural technology, production technology, and new technologies were constantly being developed. Although the human race was at war, their strength was accumulating little by little. After that war, we spent hundreds of years to truly unify the continent of Valoran. After a period of settlement and development, we began to explore this world. At that time we were already strong enough until we met the Zerg and the Protoss. Leyland said. Rinpoche took a deep breath and began to tell everyone about the second crucial battle in the development of the human race, the battle between the three races. It was also known as the battle for supremacy. At this point, the doubts in everyone's hearts decreased. It couldn't be helped since Rinpoche's narration was too detailed. He could tell the details of every person in every war. The logic was complete and there were almost no omissions. In fact, at this time, some omissions were normal. After all, no one could remember in such detail. The most important thing was that they couldn't find any loopholes in the narration of history. Baidu search 081 Chinese network yen. No advertising words. Chapter 949. Compared to the foreign races of Valoran, the Zerg and the Protoss, who had different forms and abilities as well as completely different life forms and social structures, were the real enemies. This was an arduous war that lasted for thousands of years. During the most tragic times, the blood of millions of soldiers stained the creep of the Zerg in a single battle. Everyone was shocked by this number. Following Rinpoche's narration, everyone could imagine the tragedy of that war. Countless human warriors charged into the bunkers and the Arachnid base, which was guarded by the earth spikes. Countless fighter jets took off to fight against the Zerg wyverns and queens, and countless sparks and blood bloomed in the air. At this time, everyone understood something. For example, firearms were like crossbows, but they were more powerful, had a longer range, and were easier and faster to control. For example, a tank seemed to be a vehicle completely wrapped in iron, and the most important thing was the cannon on top of the tank. For example, an airplane was a tool that could carry people, fly, and attack. If it weren't for Rinpoche's narration, they wouldn't have imagined that such a thing existed in the world. Rinpoche also described to them the huge enemy nation of the humans. With the improvement of medical standards, the birth rate of that batch of humans was higher, and their survival cycle was longer. With the development of technology and abundance of supplies, the number of members in a family was much higher than in Great Xia. Since they mainly controlled these weapons in battle, ordinary people could go into battle after training. As a result, even though there was a bloody war that lasted for thousands of years, they survived by quickly replenishing their population and training their combat power. In the end, by relying on the unified allocation of supplies and tenacity of the entire human race, they defeated the so-called Zerg and the Protoss with great difficulty, won the war between the three races and became the final king. When Rinpoche talked about how the humans had used nuclear bombs to blow up the last base of the Protoss and the remaining troops, everyone felt a surge of excitement in their hearts. They wanted to shout out loud and cheer for the blood-soaked achievements of these humans. Although they were the top combat power of the Temple of Heaven, although they were all used to seeing the wind and clouds, and although they all looked old and senile, they were once young and hot-blooded. After hearing about the deeds of the other branch of the human race, the blood in their hearts that had not yet disappeared was reignited. Good. Let's celebrate. Someone patted the statue under his seat and praised loudly. It was a burly man with a beard that resembled the scene of an explosion. At this moment, his eyes were turbid and filled with a sharpness that was stimulated. His face was full of praise. Even though his beard and hair were all white and his face was full of wrinkles, he had a tall stature and was only slightly smaller than the Aboriginals. His back was straight like a spear and his voice was like a loud bell. It could be seen that this person used to be extraordinarily mighty. Of course, after this praise, Rinpoche felt that he wasn't too bad either. He was keenly aware of the change in the atmosphere in the hall. When he saw the admiration in everyone's eyes, he knew that the time had come. Putting the latter part of the story aside, he said, "War, blood and fire, survival and death, evolution and elimination, these are the main themes of our race and also the main themes of every race. Everyone is afraid of death, this is the instinct of life. But we do not resist death. Therefore we are not averse to war. In this world, only by fighting could one obtain a slim chance of survival. If one remained stagnant and holed up in a corner of the world to seek perfection, what awaited them would ultimately be destruction. Look at you, don't you look like cattle and sheep in a pen? What's even more laughable is that you've become shepherds and raised yourselves in pens." Rinpoche mercilessly pulled everyone back to reality. Those foreign races just feel that you are no longer a threat, so they will ignore you for the time being. If they remember one day, this place will become their playground. All of you, as well as your descendants, will become their toys. Toys that they can take as they please. You don't have the courage or the ability to resist. In fact, you will even become their accomplices. You want to say no? But isn't that what you are doing now? Now, you are using the survival of the human race as a reason to eliminate the foreign races. In the future, won't you use the survival of the human race as a reason to make people willingly become their puppets? You are their accomplices. Rinpoche directly interrupted what the other party wanted to say and angrily rebuked them. However, you are lucky to have met me. You don't have to be like the people before you, living a life of self-confinement and self-degradation from birth to death. I will let you at least have a little hope in life. I will let you still have a chance to see the sky outside. I will let you still have the courage to muster what little courage you have left. I will let you have the courage to say loudly that you are a human. Enough. The old woman loudly interrupted Rinpoche's words with a trembling voice. Rinpoche was surprised to hear another feeling in her voice. Fear. That's right, fear. What was she afraid of? Was she afraid of his words? Or was she afraid of something else? Rinpoche paid attention. Just now, when everyone was excited, the old woman's expression was a little strange. Although she was too far away to see what her expression contained, it was different from the others. How can you prove that everything you say is true and not nonsense? Prove this first and then we will talk about other things. The old woman panted a few times and said. As soon as she said this, the hall quieted down again. Everyone's eyes were fixed on Rinpoche. Most of them believed Rinpoche's words. This was because there would always be various loopholes in a fabricated story. However, there weren't any in Rinpoche's words. Rinpoche's story was too detailed and too real. It was so real that everyone seemed to be able to see and touch it with their own eyes. They could feel that the entire human race was united as a rope and worked hard for the same goal. Each and every soldier was willing to sacrifice life and death for the same goal. There was only one word in everyone's heart, for humanity. The appeal of Rinpoche's story was so strong that they couldn't imagine that what he said was false. Or rather, they didn't want to believe it. Just as Rinpoche said, this was their chance. However, at this time, everyone was still silent and waiting to see Rinpoche's proof. Some of them had their eyes flickering, and they made up their minds to protect him even if he couldn't produce proof now. Proof? Do you really think that you have captured me? Rinpoche suddenly laughed. Initially, I just wanted to find the mastermind behind the scenes. Now I just want to talk to you. I want you to understand that you are walking on the wrong path without knowing it. I have to say that I'm actually quite kind-hearted. Seeing that you humans have fallen so far, I'm still trying to save you. Now that you want to see the proof. Do you remember the quantum transmission technology that I mentioned before? This is one of the technologies that we obtained from the Protoss. First of all, you have to know what quantum is. Everything in the world is made up of tiny particles, from mountains to water droplets. They are all made up of countless tiny particles. Each of us is also made up of these tiny particles. Everyone nodded slightly. In fact, they had also realized what Rinpoche said, but they couldn't express it as clearly as Rinpoche did. These tiny particles are actually made up of even smaller particles. These particles are atoms, electrons, photons, and so on. Quantum is a general term for subatomic particles. Quantum transmission is the transmission of quantum particles from one point to another. Remember what I just said. We humans are also made up of tiny particles. You mean? Everyone pondered over Rinpoche's words. Although they didn't understand the specifics, they understood the meaning behind his words. Everyone's faces were instantly filled with shock. This technology currently has a little flaw. After a transmission, it takes a few hours to recover before it can be transmitted again. Also, don't come close to me. I don't want to transmit a part of your body to another place. I don't think you want to try half of your body suddenly appearing on the other side of the world. Rinpoche chuckled. As he spoke, the air around him fluctuated. Then, everyone watched helplessly as he disappeared just like that. No, he's not in the hall, someone said with a surprised look on his face. When Shaoxing bowed to everyone and rushed out of the hall. After 15 minutes he came back with a shocked look on his face. Not even within a radius of 5 kilometers. He had always thought that Rinpoche's life and death were under his control. Not only him but everyone present felt the same way. However, at this time, everyone realized that Rinpoche really just wanted to stay and say a few words just as he said. Everyone in the hall fell silent, and their faces could no longer remain calm. Over the past 100 years, everyone's emotions had fluctuated as much as today. Sure enough, Rinpoche came from the outside. What the other party had said was indeed true. Would he come back? He said that it will take a few hours to recover before he can be transmitted again. Everyone wait here for a while. We should also discuss what to do in the future. The voice of a gentle old man came into everyone's ears. It was the deputy temple master, Zhongshang. Is there anything else to discuss? The tall man who had previously praised Zhongshang sneered. Chief, what do you say? Zhongshang didn't care at all and looked at the old woman with a smile. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second. Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 950. Rinpoche returned to Earth, walked to the window and looked at the city below. After a long time he let out a long sigh. He wasn't very nervous when he was speaking. However, after returning, the state of being fully immersed in the story subsided, and he felt waves of fatigue. Facing more than a dozen top experts who could easily kill him with their fingers and using words to shake their minds, Rinpoche really didn't want to experience such an experience again. Although he had countless stories from Earth in his mind, it wasn't easy to put them together without exposing any logical problems. He had to remember almost every word that was said and not give himself away in his subsequent words. Fortunately, it seemed like he had succeeded. What Rinpoche was most afraid of was that someone would get close to him at that moment. Although he was dozens of meters away from those honorable experts, this wasn't a problem for them. Not to mention there was Wen Shaoxing beside him. If that really happened and they found out that he came from this world without any martial arts, he would really be done for. Fortunately, this situation didn't happen. At this point, the rest of the matter was almost logical. This incident was a daunting experience without any mishaps, and the rewards were great. With this group of people, it would be easier to integrate all the experts of the human race. The only problem was killing Deputy Protector General Wu Kai, the 2 commandants and those patrolmen. The Empress wouldn't let this matter go so easily. Although the overall situation was important, revenge was more important to the Empress. She had always been a very tough and clear-cut person. Rinpoche always felt that the name Ren Wuxing was more suitable for her. After standing in front of the window for a while, Rinpoche took a shower and prepared some things. At the same time, he took the opportunity to understand the recent situation on Earth. Recently, the relationship between China and the United States had been a little tense. In fact, there used to be some friction between the two countries. Since China took over the position of the #1 economic power a few years ago, this kind of friction not only didn't decrease, but also appeared in various fields. It wasn't until the appearance of the unknown martial arts that the attitude of the Western countries, media, and people changed. Many of the allies of the United States hesitated for a while before letting go of their reservations and taking the initiative to come over. Not only that, but the number of ordinary people applying for immigration had also gradually increased. However, there had been some changes recently. The city exoskeleton system had reached the point where it could be used on the battlefield, and it had begun to be equipped with small-scale troops. To put it simply, this simple alloy shell was faster, stronger, and more accurate. Coupled with the artificial intelligence system and the basic techniques obtained from China, the individual strength of the U.S. military had increased significantly. This was the source of their confidence. Even some of America's allies began to change their stance. For these guys, technology, which was something that could be seen and touched and could be controlled, was obviously easier to understand and have confidence in than something that was hard to estimate. The news that Rinpoche received later confirmed this point. It was said that some of the earthwheel experts from the military had been transferred to that chaotic continent. It seemed like both sides were going to wrestle there. On one hand, Rinpoche asked someone to monitor the situation there. On the other hand, he prepared his own things and even got someone to bring over a blonde Westerner. 2.5 days later he returned to that world without stopping. Rinpoche was wearing pajamas, sitting on a chair, and holding a plate of fragrant beef noodles in his hand. One of his feet was on a box next to him, and the other was stepping on a person. The light in front of him darkened, and he was transported from the floating villa on Earth to the underground hall. The sudden change in light made Rinpoche almost unable to see anything clearly. However, he wasn't surprised at all. He maintained the same posture with a calm expression until he gradually saw his surroundings clearly. Then he smiled and said, "Everyone, we meet again." In fact, everyone was more surprised than him. In fact, as time passed, everyone's hearts were always restless. After all, the other party had disappeared in front of everyone's eyes. This meant that the situation had completely changed from them holding the initiative to the other party. Although the other party said that he would come back, no one knew exactly when he would come back. It wasn't until the air changed and Rinpoche's silhouette appeared that everyone calmed down. However, after they calmed down and saw the state that Rinpoche was in, they had mixed feelings. This was because Rinpoche's state at this time was really too relaxed. It was as if he had just woken up at home and was eating breakfast. Meanwhile, they were waiting anxiously here. Rinpoche naturally made such a posture on purpose. Sometimes, a posture could let others feel his attitude and also let them understand his position. Because the technology of quantum transmission isn't mature enough, I need some time to prepare. However, I came back a little earlier than I expected. Rinpoche smiled. Although Rinpoche said that the technology wasn't mature enough, it was enough to shock and astonish everyone. This was transferring a person out of thin air and back with other things. Looking at the box beside Rinpoche and the human-like object he was stepping on, everyone's eyes almost popped out of their sockets, and their hearts burned with passion. Rinpoche also felt a little scared. It was because he had forgotten that the space on the statue's shoulders was limited. Although it was enough for one person and was even spacious, there was still a box and a person at his feet. It was a blessing that he didn't fall. Rinpoche felt that his luck was really good during this period of time. "I've only eaten half of it. Do you mind?" Rinpoche held the plate and gestured to everyone. He then lowered his head and continued to finish the plate of beef noodles before putting the plate on the statue's head. "This is the Walloran people. We didn't kill them all, but absorbed the survivors into our ranks after our victory. Now we've brought them here to broaden your horizons." Rinpoche picked up the unconscious person at his feet and threw it to Wen Shaoxing. Wen Shaoxing took it and sized it up. It looked similar to a human, but its facial features and hair color were very strange. It wasn't an exaggeration to describe it as a demon. Wen Shaoxing clicked his tongue. This was the first time he had seen such a person. As for strength, it wasn't even comparable to an ordinary person, so there was nothing to be concerned about. Wen Shaoxing casually threw it to the others. A human body that weighed nearly 100 kilograms flew across a distance of dozens of meters in the air, and everyone looked like they were doing it with ease. Seeing such a strange person, everyone no longer doubted Rinpoche's words. "I told you before that two people can communicate directly from thousands of kilometers away." Rinpoche opened the box, took out a radio station, turned on the power and adjusted the frequency. There was no other sound apart from the sound of the electric current. Rinpoche wondered if he had adjusted the frequency wrong or exceeded the range. How could Dayo's official chat group be so quiet? Especially since he was missing, shouldn't it be in full swing at this time? "Is anyone there?" Rinpoche asked tentatively. At the same time, he paid attention to the others from the corner of his eye to see if they would stop him. The good news was that everyone was attentively watching Rinpoche talk to that strange thing and pricked up their ears. Rinpoche adjusted the volume to the maximum and heard a surprised and incredulous voice from the radio station. Zhao? Zhao Prince Consort? Although the voice wasn't too loud, everyone had sharp ears and was in a closed space. They immediately heard the voice coming from the strange box and their eyes lit up. It's me. Rinpoche laughed. Quick, inform Her Majesty that there's news about Zhao Prince Consort. There was a panic on the other end of the radio station. Zhao Prince Consort, where are you? Weren't you captured? Ahem, I'm just here to chat with people about life and ideals. Rinpoche coughed dryly. Zhao Prince Consort, you are finally all right. This was Zhuoyu from the Protectorate of the Southeast. Ahem, you almost scared me to death. This was Li Qianxiu. Kid, where are you? This was Hongwu. You don't know, but Her Majesty is going crazy. After causing such a big mess, you won't be able to escape a beating when you return. This was Tong Xinye stirring up trouble. The entire chat group seemed to have come to life as if someone had sent a red packet. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second. Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 951. It had been 2 days since Rinpoche had been captured. One day after Rinpoche was taken away, the Empress received the news. Tong Xinye said that Rinpoche wouldn't be able to escape a beating when he returned. He wasn't trying to scare Rinpoche. If Rinpoche dared to tell the Empress that he was just going to talk about life and ideals, Tong Xinye still remembered Her Majesty's reaction at that time. The Empress, who was originally indifferent, suddenly froze as if she was frozen in place. This was the first time he had seen her react like this since she ascended the throne. She then asked in a daze, "What? Your Majesty, Zhao Prince Consort has been captured." When? Who did it? Yesterday morning. We still don't know who did it. The Empress came back to her senses and immediately became gloomy. It was as if a storm was coming, and the pressure from her body made everyone in the hall breathless. Where? The Empress's question was out of the blue, but the person who came to report still knew what she wanted to ask. Haiyun District, Misty Rain Pavilion. What about Xianzhe? What about Lin Xiaola? What about Li Yuanzhu? The Empress emphasized every word she said. Are they dead? They are fine. As soon as the incident happened, General Xianzhe rushed back to Pingdu to pass on the news. Why aren't they dead? The Empress's voice was full of anger. Why couldn't so many people protect a single person? These people were all fine, but Rinpoche had been captured? After the Empress finished her sentence, she disappeared from the hall. She didn't even say that the court was dismissed and just left. After the Empress left, the hall boiled over like a pot of boiling water. Rinpoche's capture was the most serious matter for both the Empress and Dayo. The changes in Dayo had begun to show. Especially after witnessing the nuclear bomb, the people in court now attached more importance to Rinpoche. Whether it was the steam train or the diesel internal combustion engine that was being developed, they placed great importance on them. However, at this time, Rinpoche, who was the mastermind behind all this, had been captured. Immediately, many people wanted to go to the Yun nation to kill him. But before they could finish arguing, an aura had already arrived in front of the main hall from the rear palace. Your Majesty. Everyone turned to look at the front of the hall and saw the Empress sitting on Qi Shui's back with a longbow in her hand. A quiver of bone arrows hung beside Qi Shui. This was all that the Empress had. The Empress took a deep breath, suppressed her anger and said to Shi Qin, "Inform Zidong Lai to tell everyone in the Yun nation that they have two choices, find Zhao Prince Consort or die." All the people of the Yun nation. The Empress repeated. This time, it wasn't just the practitioners of the Yun nation, but the nearly 100 million people of the Yun nation. This showed how angry the Empress was. If something really happened to him, she dared to bury all the people of the Yun nation with him. Even if it left behind a world of blood and countless blood feuds, it didn't matter. Everyone in the imperial court was flabbergasted. Even they were shocked by the Empress's order. It was not tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or millions of people. It was tens or even tens of millions of people. That was 5 times the population of the Aboriginals. To kill all of them. Everyone felt a little pressured. Based on the current military strength of Dayo, they could transfer troops from the Protectorate of the North and Protectorate of the South to the Yun nation, which could reach a maximum of 80,000 soldiers. If they had to kill everyone, with 80,000 soldiers, how many does one person have to kill? Someone asked softly. 100, right? Nonsense, it's obviously 10 by 10. What's the difference between 10 by 10 and 100? Someone from the Ministry of Revenue couldn't help but ask. It's much more than that. One person has to kill at least 1,000. Oh, I see. That's right. Everyone in the hall had already started to think about how many people one person had to kill. After the Empress finished speaking, she ignored everyone's reaction, rode Qi Shui out of the palace alone, and headed for the Yun nation. A group of ministers followed behind her, and they followed Qi Shui to persuade the Empress. At least bring a few more people and have someone to take care of her. However, after a few dozen kilometers, they were still left far behind by Qi Shui. After a discussion, more than half of them returned to Lan City, and the other half went straight to the Yun nation. One day and night, a full 20 hours. The Empress ran for nearly 1,000 kilometers within these 20 hours, and Qi Shui's body began to bubble. There was a large amount of water stored in Qi Shui's body and on the surface of its skin. However, as it ran for a long time, every cell on its body was breathing and trying its best to absorb energy from the outside world. This resulted in a result. The water and air fused on the surface of Qi Shui's body and changed. Due to the high-speed wind, they finally turned into bubbles. Along the way, bubbles danced all over the sky, and the Empress followed behind Qi Shui like a bubble flag. The Empress went straight to Pingdu, and the first thing she asked upon arrival was, "Zhao Prince Consort, is there any news?" The second thing she said was, "Give it water, a lot of it." The third thing she said was, "Where are they?" The Empress was furious, but she wasn't given a chance to vent. Xanger and the others were still looking for clues outside. "Has my message been passed down?" The Empress asked Zidonglai with a cold face. "I have already informed all the sects in the Yun nation and posted it in all the cities." Zidonglai's face was still cold. This was mainly because he had injured his facial nerves in the past, so his face was expressionless. He didn't discount the Empress's orders at all. Although it hadn't been posted all over the Yun nation, it had been posted in most of the cities. Overnight, it could be said that the entire Yun nation was shaken. For the sake of one person, nearly 100 million people of the Yun nation were going to be buried. It could be said that the Yun nation, which had just settled down, was once again in turmoil. This news immediately aroused the anger of all the people of the Yun nation. People scolded the Empress for being arrogant and cruel. All of a sudden, the youths of the Yun nation were so angry that they almost revolted. They could still retreat previously, but with this news, if it really reached that point, no one could retreat anymore. Before this, many people of the Yun nation didn't know who Zhao Prince Consort was. Only when the Empress's husband was mentioned would people suddenly realize who he was. However, after this, there was no one who didn't know the name Zhao Prince Consort. Of course, it wasn't anything positive. However, the Empress didn't care about this, and neither did Zidonglai. The only person who cared about this matter still didn't know. The Empress rested for a few hours in Pingdu. Although she wanted to go directly to the place where Rinpoche had disappeared, she could endure it. However, Qi Shui couldn't and needed to rest for at least a few hours to recover a little. Just as she was about to set off again, she received news from Rinpoche. When she heard that he was fine, the Empress felt exhaustion wash over her. It wasn't physical exhaustion but mental exhaustion. From yesterday morning until now she had been tense all the time. She quickly walked to the room with the radio station and heard Rinpoche's voice talking to everyone through the radio station. Hearing this voice, the Empress felt that her tense nerves could finally relax. She took a few steps forward, took the radio station's walkie-talkie and asked in a deep voice, "Where are you?" "I should be in Great Xia." Rinpoche's voice immediately weakened when he heard the Empress's deep and cold voice. "Are you in danger now? Specific location? I'm going to look for you." The Empress really didn't want to wait for Rinpoche to come back on his own. What she urgently wanted now was to rush over and capture him. Then, she would hang him from the beam of the palace and give him a good beating. She would then ground him and forbid him from leaving a radius of 50 kilometers from Lan City. As for the person who had captured Rinpoche, that wasn't the most important thing at the moment. The most important thing was to find out where Rinpoche was and whether he was in danger. She would only be at ease if she went there herself. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second. Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 952. Even though it was only one day, which was a very short period of time, it was truly a torment for the Empress. Fortunately, she was relieved after receiving Rinpoche's message. However, Rinpoche didn't tell her his current location. After all, there were more than a dozen people looking at him. He used the radio station to communicate because they wanted to see a tool that could allow them to communicate from thousands of kilometers away. When the voices of Hong Wu, Tong Jinye, and the others came out of the radio station, everyone in the hall gasped in unison. There was also the sound of people slapping their thighs. It was indeed like this. It was indeed true. To be able to communicate from thousands of kilometers away, the value of such a treasure was too great. If it were owned by an ordinary person, it would definitely be kept a secret and wouldn't be used until the most critical moment. However, for the other party, this was a commonplace tool that didn't need to be concerned about. This could be seen from their attitude. Rinpoche simply said a few words, turned off the radio station and looked up at the crowd again. Everyone, it's time to change things. I believe that you will choose your future well. Were they going to be reared as cattle or sheep, or were they going to use this opportunity to fight for their lives? Since things had already reached this point, Rinpoche wasn't worried about their choice. In fact, they had indeed made a choice and this was their only chance. If they had a choice, who would be willing to be livestock for the rest of their lives? Moreover, these were top experts who stood at the top of the human race. Everyone was silent and waiting for someone to speak. I saw that you brought someone with you just now. I want to go to your country to take a look. An old woman's voice was heard. Everyone's eyes were filled with astonishment, but they quickly lowered their gazes. Although this request was abrupt, it seemed reasonable after thinking about it. Who wouldn't want to see such a world with their own eyes? Rinpoche looked at her with a faint smile and said, I refuse. What? The old woman's face darkened. You aren't qualified. Rinpoche said faintly, not caring about what the person in front of him thought. I'm just giving you a chance. You aren't qualified to ask for anything. Even if you have chosen your path, it's all for your own sake. What does that have to do with me? Everyone was speechless as they thought about Rinpoche's words. Although they didn't feel good, he was right. They were only doing it for themselves. The old woman looked sullen. It had been a long time since anyone had spoken to her like this. Besides, what could they do even if he rejected them? The other party had already proven that his words were true. Perhaps Rinpoche could threaten Zhongshan with his life and the Empress's life. However, the other people in the Temple of Heaven wouldn't agree to it. The first person to oppose Rinpoche would be Deputy Temple Master Zhongshan. Now was not the time to shed all pretense of cordiality. After taking a few deep breaths, the old woman regained her composure. Then can you let us leave this land of exile? This was also everyone's hope. Since Rinpoche could come, it meant that he could leave as well. Everyone suspected that he had a passage to enter and exit the banished lands. Some people's hearts were in their throats as they stared intently at his expression. As long as they could leave the banished land, they would be able to fly freely. Since they were able to achieve what they had today among billions of humans, no one would worry about leaving this place. However, there were also people who sneered. This kind of thinking was weak in itself. No. I came here by accident. I can leave through quantum transmission and I can even take a few people with me. However, are you going to abandon all humans and run away? I have no intention of helping you. There is only one choice for you and that is to fight. For yourselves and for all humans, fight against the heavens, the earth, the sea, and the foreign races until you leave this place. This is where your value lies, and this is where the humans here can show their value. Everyone was silent for a while before someone said, What do you want to do? What do you want us to do? This attitude confirmed Rinpoche's position. After all, he came from a more powerful human race. He could change all of this and leave at any time. Rinpoche smirked. Like I said, fight, war, defeat the heavens, the earth, the sea, and the enemy until you step on all the corpses in the world or are stepped on by others. Of course, I will bring you technology just like what I'm doing now. The development of technology requires time and resources. The experts of the human race also have the potential to compete with the experts of the enemy. However, before that, I have a request. Rinpoche's gaze slid across everyone's faces that were hidden in the shadows. Cut off your own rotten flesh. The purpose of the establishment of the Temple of Heaven is good. However, over the past thousands of years, the Temple of Heaven has become a malignant tumor within the human race. I hope to see your side that is valuable to the human race. In fact, what he wanted to say was to disband the Temple of Heaven. This land didn't need an uncontrolled organization with so many experts lurking in the dark. However, he also understood that this proposal was almost impossible to achieve. On the contrary, it would make everyone hostile to him, which wouldn't do him any good. Therefore, he simply buried this idea in his heart and thought of ways to rope them in later. This world would change faster and faster, and these old and rotten people would eventually be unable to keep up with the times and be abandoned by this era. After listening to Rinpoche's words, everyone had their own thoughts. Most of them were unconvinced, but no one spoke up because it didn't affect their interests. Who's Su Wuming? Rinpoche asked. I am. Are you asking me because of the Yun Nation? I can tell you that I was the one who did it. What do you want me to do? A thin old man with 100 strands of hair opened his eyes. His eyes seemed to contain a sword, and his gaze became like a sword that pierced people's skin. Rinpoche had some impression of this person because he didn't have any surprised reactions like the others. He just sat there quietly, but it was impossible to ignore him. Besides you, there are others, right? Rinpoche asked faintly. Su Wuming was silent. Although it wasn't difficult for him to kill Wu Kai, it wasn't his turn to kill ordinary warriors. The traces of weapons left at the scene also explained everything. I arranged it, Wen Shaoxing said calmly. In fact, Rinpoche knew even if he didn't say it. Luohua sect was also your doing, right? Rinpoche asked again. It was arranged by the corpse dog hall, Wen Shaoxing replied. Rinpoche could feel everyone's eyes on him. After pondering for a while, he realized that this matter wasn't easy to handle. After all, Su Wuming wasn't an ordinary person. Regardless of his strength, he was also a member of the Temple of Heaven. Besides, this matter definitely wasn't decided by Su Wuming alone. If Rinpoche wanted to force him to death, how could the others sit back and watch? Needless to say, the fox mourned the death of the rabbit. Besides, there were still Wen Shaoxing and the others. As for the matter of Luohua sect, he didn't care much. If that was the only thing, he would just smile and let it go. However, he couldn't let Wu Kai go. Even if the two sides were enemies before, according to the novels, shouldn't the enmity be resolved with a smile and no longer be pursued? Shouldn't the overall situation be more important? If he said this to the Empress, would she listen? Not to mention the Empress, even the other people in the court wouldn't agree. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth was the habit of the Aboriginals. Rinpoche had been on the side of the Aboriginals since he came to this world, so he naturally had to stand on their side. Rinpoche pondered but couldn't figure it out. In fact, he had considered this problem on Earth. However, this problem was still unsolvable. Rinpoche lowered his eyelids slightly and finally made a decision. A life for a life, a debt for a life. As soon as he said this, it was as if a volcano had erupted in the main hall, and a tyrannical aura pierced the sky. Not far away, everyone in the fishing village stopped in their tracks and looked in the direction of the sea god temple with bewilderment. Baidu search 881 Chinese network. No advertising words. Chapter 953. A life for a life and a debt for a life. This voice was heard in the hall and everyone was in an uproar. One by one, the doddering elders opened their eyes with a cold glint in them. A tyrannical aura swept through the hall, and cracks appeared on the statue in the temple of the sea god above. This was no longer a matter of Su Wuming, but of the entire Temple of Heaven. Su Wuming was the venerable of the Temple of Heaven, and everything he did represented the Temple of Heaven. Rinpoche's other requests could still be discussed, but the people of the Temple of Heaven couldn't agree to this one. Many of them were even angrier. Even if he was from another human nation, how dare he make such a request? Rinpoche lowered his eyes slightly and let those auras surround him. In fact, everyone had a sense of propriety and didn't directly attack Rinpoche with their auras. Otherwise, more than a dozen top spirit wheel experts could seriously injure Rinpoche with their auras alone. Rinpoche sighed in his heart. After going around in circles, everything had returned to the beginning, and the effect of his previous words had been wasted. How could he not know that the other party couldn't agree to this request? However, he still had to show such an attitude. This was because he was Zhao Prince Consort of Dayo. He couldn't tell the Empress and the court to give up their hatred for the sake of the overall situation, right? He couldn't do it. Whether emotionally or in other aspects, Dayo was his home in this world. As for reason, Rinpoche felt that he was still in the right now, but unfortunately the other party probably wouldn't reason with him. Forget it, let it go back to the original position. Fortunately, there were still two gains. One was that he knew who the mastermind was, and the other was that he had at least saved his life. This was the most important thing. As for the Temple of Heaven itself, it was dispensable in Rinpoche's heart. Although they were indeed powerful and needed such tyrannical experts, they would definitely be able to go further after leaving Tianjin Basin, especially Su Wuming. However, as mentioned before, such a powerful and uncontrollable force was of little value to Rinpoche. It could even be said that the disadvantages outweighed the advantages. The stronger they were, the more troublesome it would be in the future. With this in mind, Rinpoche's desire to subdue these people faded. If possible, it would be a good choice to blow them up with a nuclear bomb. Without this force there would be less trouble. Unfortunately, the 8 sub-hall masters and vice-hall masters were still outside. If they were blown up, the remaining forces would retaliate crazily. Moreover, his teleportation cooldown was not up yet. Rinpoche opened his eyes, looked at everyone and said faintly, "Think about it yourselves. Of course, you can also hide here and wait for the day when the human race becomes glorious." This was another opportunity for them to lay low from now on. With the skills of these people and the influence they had in the dark, it would be very difficult for the Empress to find them. After he finished speaking, he carried the unconscious foreigner, jumped down from the statue's shoulder, and walked out without looking back. He believed that these people would not do anything to him. Then his vision went black. "Temple Master, we can't touch this person." Zhong Shang sat on the statue with a faint smile in his eyes. "Even if it is for the sake of the human race. We can't let him leave for now." The old lady landed on the statue that Rinpoche was originally sitting on. She stretched out her hand and opened the box that was slightly bigger than a person. Other than the radio station, there was also a metal box. She didn't know what was inside. "Temple Master, what are we going to do with him?" Zhong Shang asked again. "Although this person is from the outside world and is of great importance, he is too arrogant and doesn't respect the Temple of Heaven at all. Let's keep him for a few days and discuss how to deal with him. We'll only keep him for a few days. After he wakes up, he must have a way to leave," Zhong Shang said. Although the old lady didn't say anything, she was quite happy. Originally this person was a little troublesome, but now he was courting death. Whoever dared to agree to his conditions would be a traitor of the Temple of Heaven. In recent years, the pressure from Zhong Shang to force her to abdicate had been increasing. Now she could recruit Su Wuming and the others who were originally neutral, which was also a good thing. With a shake of her feet, the radio station and the metal box flew out. When she opened the metal box, she saw a cylinder that was half the height of a person. It wasn't light and its surface was completely made of metal. She didn't know what it was used for. The old lady returned to the statue with the cylinder and the radio station and repeated, "It's impossible to agree to his request. A life for a life? What a joke. This person came from the outside world, but he wasn't without weaknesses. Qi Zixiao was his weakness. Lock him up for a few days and don't let him wake up. Inform the sub-temple masters to come back for a discussion." "Chief, I'm very interested in this person. How about keeping him with me? You won't be worried with me guarding him, right?" Zhong Shang suddenly said. The old lady's eyes flickered. She originally wanted to keep Rinpoche by her side to see why the soul worm didn't work. She sensed that the soul worm was fine at the moment. However, since Zhong Shang had spoken, she couldn't refute. Moreover, if something really happened to this person, she would have an excuse. The old lady nodded. "This person is very important. Deputy, don't let anything happen to him." "Of course." Zhong Shang laughed. "That's all for today." Without saying a word, everyone got up one after another and disappeared from the hall. They also had to consider what to do in the future. Many people were also sighing in their hearts. Rinpoche's words originally tempted them, but unfortunately the other party made a request that they couldn't agree to. The future situation was a little unpredictable. They really needed some time to weigh their options. Su Wuming took a deep look at Rinpoche and left without saying a word. It wasn't until Zhong Shang left with Rinpoche and the strange man that the old lady snorted and sat there with her eyes closed. After a full hour, the stone statue under the old woman suddenly moved. The stone statue moved several meters to the side, revealing a pitch-black passage. The old lady walked into the passage, and the stone statue returned to its original position again. After walking down hundreds of steps along the passage, a small room appeared in front of them. In addition to the 2 oil lamps on the wall, there was a chair and a table. The most eye-catching thing was the 5 crystal coffins on the other side. There was an old man lying in each coffin. His whole body was soaked in a blue liquid, and even his nose and mouth were immersed in the liquid. However, if one took a closer look at these old men, they actually looked somewhat similar to the chief of the Temple of Heaven. The old lady stood in front of the coffin closest to the door for a moment, took a bell from the wall and shook it. The crisp sound of the bell seemed to have some kind of mysterious penetrating power, as if it came from the distant horizon. The old man in the crystal coffin at the end suddenly opened his eyes. Golden light burst out from his eyes, intertwined with the blue liquid, and dyed the liquid green. If Rinpoche saw this scene, he would definitely praise it. It was green and bright. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second. Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 954. The update had to be delayed. Originally, he had slept during the day and felt quite energetic after waking up. He had just changed the time, slept at night, and still felt like sleeping during the day. Just now, he had slept from 12 noon to 5 p.m. He reckoned that he had failed to adjust the time again. He felt stifled. Of course, these were all small problems. The most important thing was to garner support for his biological daughter. Throw all the tickets at her. The role of the year in The Female Empress's Gigolo was garnering support for his biological daughter. Currently typing, please wait a moment. After the content has been updated, please refresh the page to receive the latest update. Chapter 955. The elders in the 5 coffins were all old women. Their hair was all white and their skin was full of wrinkles and spots. The old woman at the end opened her eyes and stiffly stretched out her hands to push open the crystal coffin above her. She sat up and greedily breathed in the world's air. The liquid slid down the surface of her body and finally gathered in the coffin to form a calm water surface. There was not a single drop of liquid left on the old woman's body, and the surface of her skin was only slightly damp. The old woman greedily breathed in the world's air. Her eyes scanned the room and finally focused on the temple master. The muscles on her face twitched a few times, and she stretched out her stiff hands to rub her cheeks and throat. Finally, she spoke in a voice that sounded like 2 pieces of wood rubbing against each other. Qingdian, how long has it been? 83 years and 107 days, the temple master replied. 83 years. The old woman in the coffin repeated softly. She turned her head stiffly and glanced at the other coffins. She asked, haven't you found a suitable container yet? Not yet. It's too rare to find a container that can meet the requirements for the 6th conversion, the temple master said. It's getting rarer. When Qing Ting was around, 1 or 2 of them could be found occasionally. However, when I was around, I didn't encounter one in hundreds of years, the old woman in the coffin said. This will be the last time I wake up. If I still don't have a container the next time I wake up, I will turn into ashes and die. I will never have the chance to change my container again. She then looked up at the temple master and said, you are my only descendant and the last one here. This is the 2nd time you will be changing your container. There are still 1,000 years left. There's a chance you should go back. After so many years, everything in the Temple of Heaven has been set in stone. Even without you, the Temple of Heaven will continue to follow its previous path. As for us, Qingju and Qingzi no longer have the chance to change their containers. Qing Ting still has 100 years left, and no matter how much I delay it, I will only have 300 years left after I wake up. If there's no hope, then destroy everything here. From the old woman's tone, it could be seen that she was not too keen on finding another container and changing her container again. Now, delaying her life was just an instinct that had long been seen through. Even if she fell into eternal darkness after this deep sleep, it would not cause too much of a stir in her heart. Even if this awakening reduced her existence by another 200 years, she didn't care at all. After that, he asked, what happened to wake me up this time? The temple master said, if there were no changes, it would indeed be as you said. Even without me, the Temple of Heaven would continue on its original path. But now something has changed. The temple master of the Heaven Dao Temple frowned. The old woman in the coffin raised her head and looked at her. It seems very serious, otherwise you wouldn't have woken me up. In addition to this place, there is also a group of humans. The chief of the Temple of Heaven told him about Rinpoche in detail. The old woman's expression didn't change, but the golden light in her eyes became more and more intense. After a while, the golden light in the old woman's eyes gradually dimmed. It's not necessarily a bad thing. Whatever they want to do, let them do it. You just need to continue doing what you're doing. Don't be impatient. The importance of the Temple of Heaven has already begun to decline, but it seems that it is still very useful. Then he said meaningfully, what's theirs is ours. As long as you bring everything they have to the God of Gold Zun, not only will everything they have become useless, but you might also be able to learn something from it. After all, our path has reached its limit, and we haven't been able to find a way to go further for many years. This is an opportunity. What I'm worried about is the other group of humans. According to that person, they are very powerful. From what he said about the Zerg and Protoss, although they aren't as powerful as the god of gold armor and the other deities, they aren't easy to deal with, and their numbers are even more terrifying, the temple master of the Heaven Dao Temple said. That's why we have to bring things back and turn what's theirs into ours. As long as we understand them, we can find their weaknesses. Besides, most importantly, have you noticed that their individual strength is very weak, and they don't have the power to resist our race? As long as we can find their location, everything they have will also be ours, the old woman said faintly. I understand, the temple master of the Heaven Dao Temple said. This may be the last time we meet in this world. I will return to the spiritual temple and wait for you. After the old woman finished speaking, she greedily took a few more breaths before slowly lying back in the coffin. The temple master of the Heaven Dao Temple silently closed the lid of the crystal coffin, turned around and walked out. The empress looked at Xinjia, Lin Xiaola, Li Yuanzhu, Lin Yu, and the others in front of her with a calm expression. Although it was calm, it was like a storm brewing on the surface of a calm sea. Remove Xinjia from her position as the commander of the guards and send her to the mines for 3 years. The empress said coldly. Remove Lin Xiaola from her position as the librarian of Qingxin Palace Hall and send her to the mines for a year. Xinjia's job was as a guard. After such a big incident, she was only sent to the mines for 3 years because nothing had happened to Ren Baqian. If Ren Baqian hadn't contacted her through the radio, the empress would have thought of pulling Xinjia down and beheading her. Xinjia silently bowed to the empress, took off her helmet, put it on the ground and began to take off her armor. Zidonglai looked down and stood to one side. Xinjia took off her armor. In addition to safety pants, there was also a sports vest that was given to her by Ren Baqian. Give her a set of coarse clothes and immediately send her to the mines, the empress said in a deep voice. She turned to look at Lin Xiaola, only to see her head lowered and not saying a word. However, her nose was bubbling. The empress was a little angry even though she knew that this situation was normal for Lin Xiaola. Lin Xiaola, add one more crime and send her to the mines for 3 years as well. Lin Xiaola was speechless. Drag her away. Is it over? What did Her Majesty say? Lin Xiaola raised her head and asked softly as she was dragged out by the arms. I didn't think it through. Li Yuanzhu said faintly after seeing Qi Zixiao's gaze. Although she wasn't from Dayo and Qi Zixiao didn't have the right to punish her, she still felt guilty and took the initiative to speak. Go back to Great Xia. I don't want to see you. Sorry. Li Yuanzhu cupped her hands at the empress. She knew that the empress was furious at the moment and would wait for Ren Baqian to return. She pulled Lin Yu out of the courtyard. Lin Yu was deep in thought. After they were out of the city, Lin Yu asked doubtfully, in that case, can I only go to the mines to play with Lin Xiaola in the future? Which mine? Li Yuanzhu turned to look and felt helpless. She didn't know what to do with this girl. Back then she took a long time to say that Ren Baqian was upstairs. When everyone returned, he was already gone. She felt like killing her. If she had said it at that time, none of these things would have happened. Let's go back to Great Xia. Half a day later, Lin Yu suddenly thought of something and said, we have run out of melon seeds. Let's go back to Lan City to buy some. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second. Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 956. After Li Yuanzhu and the rest left, the empress sat on a chair and stroked the bulge in her abdomen. Zidonglai stood quietly at the side without saying a word. Have they all retreated? The empress's gaze was still on the ground as she asked faintly. They've retreated. However, the news has spread, and the people from the Yun nation don't seem too happy, Zidonglai said casually. In fact, they weren't just unhappy. Their discontent was like a volcano eruption. His country had just been destroyed, and he had just convinced himself to start a new life under a steel knife. Suddenly, he had to bury nearly 100 million people in the Yun nation with him? Although the message was cancelled after only 1 day, who knew if it was really cancelled? Would it happen again after a while? What did the aboriginals treat the people of the Yun nation as? Pigs and dogs? Under such circumstances, one could imagine how the people of the Yun nation would react. However, Zidonglai simply said, I'm not too happy. The empress pondered for a moment and said, appease them. It wasn't that the empress didn't know the significance of the Yun nation. Then he said, if there are any who make a big fuss, kill one to warn the others. I will order the rearguard commandery to assist you later. Yes. The value of the rearguard commandery in the Yun nation wasn't small. The rearguard commandery could do a lot of things that the military couldn't, especially when it came to the situation among the people in the underworld. At this point, the significance of Rinpoche's establishment of the rearguard commandery could already be seen. Go down. The Empress waved her hand. After Zidonglai left, the Empress stroked her lower abdomen. Her thoughts turned to Rinpoche as she wondered where he was now. That small body of his could be smacked to death with a single slap. In the future, I will definitely not let him go too far away. I kind of want to drink calcium milk. Could that guy's hair be saved? Forget it, it doesn't matter. After thinking about it, the Empress smiled. A moment later, he furrowed his brows. Where was that fellow? Where was Great Xia located? At this moment, he was on a planet in his sea of knowledge. He did not expect the other party to suddenly attack him. He did not expect that after he fainted, he would appear in his sea of consciousness after an unknown amount of time. Unfortunately, he could not wake up his body. The other party must have used some sort of method. What was he planning to do? No matter what the other party planned to do, there was no need to pay attention to it. He had given them a chance, but since they had other ideas, he would send them to reunite. In the box he brought back, other than the radio, there was a 400,000-ton nuclear warhead, and it could be detonated with a delay. Originally, the negotiations were going well, and he thought that the situation was settled. The nuclear bomb was just a precaution, but he didn't expect that it would actually be used. It was a pity that he had wasted so much time and effort. Rinpoche felt a little regretful. In the end, he still had to take this step. There were many experts in the Temple of Heaven, and if one were to select carefully, there would still be people who could be of use. Unfortunately, he didn't have the time or opportunity to do so. Compared to them, his strength was still too weak. Just like this time, he had no ability to resist at all. It was better to send them on their way. After a while, he began to study the city below again. This new city was the core of Dayo and would be the center of the entire human race in the future, so it had to be as perfect as possible. In the endless darkness of the starry sky, a silkworm-like insect was flying into the distance. Not knowing how far ahead it was, there was a colorful area. It seemed to be even bigger than the previous balls. That human's knowledge bead was probably hidden there. However, this human sea of knowledge was too big. That area didn't seem far, but after flying for so long, it still couldn't get closer. Naturally, Rinpoche didn't know that there was an insect flying around in his sea of knowledge, let alone what the so-called pearl of knowledge was. Back then, he had invested everything he had into the singularity. In the end, it had evolved into such a huge universe. After staying in his sea of knowledge for an unknown period of time, Rinpoche felt a suction coming from a certain point in his sea of knowledge. He knew that he could finally wake up. After a moment of dizziness, Rinpoche finally felt the existence of his body. He had to admit that it was convenient to use the divine sense in his sea of knowledge, and he could even shout, "I said, let there be light." However, without a physical body, it always made him feel empty. When he opened his eyes, he found himself on a couch. The surrounding environment was an antique and rather exquisite room that was mainly made of brown solid wood. A faint fragrance lingered in front of his nose, making him want to take a deep breath and swallow it into his stomach. In addition to himself, there was an old man sitting on a chair in the room, holding a cup of tea and slowly sipping it. The old man looked gentle with a faint smile in his eyes. He wore a green robe and sat very straight. "Mr. Ren, I was rude before." Rinpoche sat up from the bed and felt his body, but there was no discomfort. After feeling his body, Rinpoche looked up and asked, "Who are you?" It was too dark in the hall earlier, and he couldn't see the faces of everyone clearly. It was difficult for him to recognize the person in front of him. "I'm Zong Shang, one of the deputy temple masters of the Temple of Heaven." Rinpoche nodded. It turned out that this person was Zong Shang. "Temple Master Zong. How much time has passed?" 4 days. That was enough time. Rinpoche turned his gaze to the furnishings in the room and looked at them with some regret. "Mr. Ren, don't you have anything to ask?" Zong Shang asked with a smile. "What do I need to ask?" Rinpoche asked faintly. "I've given you a chance to choose." Zong Shang's eyes darkened. "Mr. Ren, we can't hand over Su Wuming. He represents the Temple of Heaven." "I've also given you a chance to disappear from now on," Rinpoche said bluntly. "However, it seems that you think I'm joking with you." "It was the Temple Master's decision to keep you," Zong Shang said. "For me, it might not be a bad thing to disappear from now on. The Temple of Heaven has carried too many burdens for too long. Rinpoche sneered, turned his head and continued to look at the furnishings. In fact, there have always been two voices in the Temple of Heaven. One of them represents the current actions of the Temple of Heaven, while the other expresses disgust with some of the actions. You mean that the Temple Master is the former and you are the latter? Rinpoche asked with his back facing Zhongshan. That's right. However, we are too few in number and aren't strong enough to change the situation of the Temple of Heaven. Zhongshan nodded with a smile. Therefore, I came to see you in the hope of cooperating with you. What qualifications do you have to cooperate with me? Rinpoche was finally a little interested, but his words lacked interest and weren't polite at all. For so many years, the Temple of Heaven has been in the dark, watching the changes in the world and grasping a lot of things. I think there should be a place where you can use it. Rinpoche's heart skipped a beat. The other party's attitude was quite humble this time. Tell me about it. The smile on Zhongshan's face slowly faded and he said seriously, kill the Temple Master. He's not human. First set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second. Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 957. The person who killed the chief of the temple isn't human. Hearing these words echoing in the room, Rinpoche's heart skipped a beat. He turned to look at Zhongshan and saw that his face was serious and his eyes were filled with killing intent. Zhongshan's face, which originally looked gentle and kind, was now a little fierce. How did you know? Rinpoche asked in a deep voice. He had wondered if there would be foreign races in the temple, but it was just a thought. He didn't expect that there would be people in the temple who knew about it. The seriousness on Zhongshan's face eased slightly. He got up and walked to Rinpoche's side. He moved a shelf, and it slid silently to the side, revealing a tunnel. Please follow me. Zhongshan got up and walked down. He took a flint from the wall next to him, lit a torch and the tunnel was immediately illuminated. The two of them walked all the way down and finally came to a secret room. Your defenses aren't very tight, Rinpoche said lightly. How could the chief of the temple and the foreign races be placed in such a simple secret room? If someone else had come in by mistake, Zhongshan would have turned into ashes by now. It looks simple but in fact, it requires special finger strength to knock dozens of times in an instant. Other than me, no one can come in unless this residence is razed to the ground. However, at that time, our branch will probably be extinct. It won't be a big deal even if we are discovered, Zhongshan explained as he led the way. Rinpoche finally understood. Your branch? Rinpoche asked again. When the temple was founded, there were a total of 42 ancestors, and a total of 31 branches were passed down. Over time, these 31 branches became 19 branches. There are exactly 8 chief, 2 deputy chief and 1 chief. Rinpoche did some calculations and found that this number was just right. Where there are people, there will be disputes. Zhongshan sighed. Rinpoche immediately knew where this number came from. However, about half of them died without knowing why. Zhongshan said again. As he spoke, he lit a few oil lamps hanging on the wall in the secret room, and everything in the room was suddenly revealed. There was nothing in the space, not even the simplest stool. Instead, the walls were full of paintings. Upon closer inspection, they were all women. What was surprising was that one of the portraits on the wall was of a young woman, another of an old woman, then another young woman, then another old woman, and so on. Zhongshan pointed to 2 of the pictures and said, "This is the first temple master Yujing. This is after she grew old. This is the second palace master of the Yujing Palace, as well as after he grew old." Rinpoche stood in front of the wall and looked at them one by one. Suddenly he gasped in surprise. That's Hall Master Fidu. He should be the 3rd Hall Master's faction. This is Vice Palace Lord Yujing, the 4th one. This is the Deputy Palace Master of the Palace of Heaven, the 5th. Zhongshan introduced the paintings one by one. If one only looked at the pictures of them when they were young, one wouldn't be able to see much. They had different appearances, different temperaments, and different beauty and ugliness. However, if one looked at the portraits of their old age, one would see that all of their faces were somewhat similar. No matter what their faces were like when they were young, whether they were peerlessly beautiful or ugly when they grew old, they actually looked quite similar. They were even exactly the same. For example, the 1st Temple Master Yujing, the 4th Deputy Palace Master Yujing, the 7th Temple Master of the Palace of Heaven, and the 14th Temple Master of the Kain Temple. For example, the 2nd Temple Master Yujing, the 11th Temple Master Yujing, and the 14th Temple Master of the Palace of Heaven. They were almost carved from the same mold. However, when they were young, these people had almond-shaped eyes, slanted eyes, oval faces, and round faces. However, when they grew old, they actually looked like they were carved from the same mold. In addition, the appearance of each temple master was also quite similar, especially their eyes, which seemed to have a kind of, due to their martial arts, their lifespan is longer than that of ordinary warriors. Therefore, very few people can discover the changes in their appearance. Rinpoche was a little puzzled. Why did you draw every temple master? Because every one of them was a woman. Upon hearing this answer, Rinpoche felt that Zhongshan's faction was actually quite pitiful. Because the first two temple masters Yujing were quite popular, some people naturally kept their portraits at that time. However, some problems were discovered after that. They were too similar in their old age, Zhongshan continued. Rinpoche felt that there should be more than two temple masters. Just two temple masters didn't mean anything. Zhongshan definitely wasn't telling the truth. However, this had nothing to do with him. He wasn't interested in the dark history of Zhongshan's faction. He wasn't interested at all. What was wrong with men being a little wretched and perverted? At first, we thought that it was because of their martial arts, but that wasn't the case. They were always secretly looking for a replacement, which wasn't surprising. We were the same. However, their approach seemed to be somewhat different. In a short period of time, the strength of those who took over would increase greatly, and the original temple master would die. Those who took over would be promoted in a very short period of time and be very familiar with many things, which was why we were aware of the problem. In fact, 1,000 years after coming to this land, the human race had a renaissance. At that time, many outstanding people were born. There were 11 people in the world who had reached the level of opening up heaven and earth, and thousands of spirit will experts. At that time, some people proposed to return to their homeland, and even many people in the Temple of Heaven thought so. This was because the reproduction ability of the foreign races was far inferior to ours, and their recovery ability wasn't as good as ours. At that time, large areas of land were empty. As long as they found a place to stay and persisted for more than 10 years, it was possible for them to regain their foothold and return to their homeland. However, this idea was later interrupted, and they killed those outstanding people who wanted to leave. They were also the ones who caused all of this. From then on, our faction began to pay attention to them and finally discovered the truth. In fact, it wasn't just us. There were others who also discovered it, but they later died for various reasons. Only we have survived until now, Zhongshan briefly recounted. Why didn't you say it out loud? Wasn't the entire Temple of Heaven a match for her alone? Rinpoche asked. She wasn't alone, Zhongshan replied. Back then, someone revealed this news in a meeting attended by half of the people. As a result, 5 factions completely sided with her and survived. In addition, the temple masters of 11 factions died, and 4 of the factions that didn't have a successor were completely destroyed. Rinpoche sneered after hearing this. There were actually people who sided with the foreign races. Zhongshan also looked a little ashamed when he talked about this matter. No one knows what happened at that time. However, one thing is certain. Her faction was stronger than it looked on the surface, and it might even be stronger than all of us combined. This was why 11 temple masters died and 5 temple masters had no choice but to side with her. After that, my faction didn't dare to act rashly because we should be the only ones who knew the truth. Zhongshan sighed. If we were also severed, then the Temple of Heaven would really become a lackey of the foreign races. I originally thought that I wouldn't have a chance in this generation, but I didn't expect to meet another human faction. I felt that the opportunity one had been waiting for had finally arrived. From the story you told, you should have very powerful weapons that are enough to fight against her, Zhongshan said. Su Wuming surpassed the spirit will level, right? He wasn't her match either? Rinpoche suddenly asked. There are still 1 or 2 people in every generation who can reach the heaven and earth domain. Back then there were also experts who weren't weaker than Su Wuming, Zhongshan said. Rinpoche raised his eyebrows. He originally wanted to blow this place up, but the emergence of Zhongshan made it a little difficult to deal with. Rinpoche did have a powerful weapon, but it also had a large area of effect. When that time came, it would be impossible for others to leave except for him. Otherwise, the other party would also notice that something was wrong. As for whether Zhongshan's words were true or false, Rinpoche didn't have much doubt. This was because the old woman's reaction at that time had already made him feel strange. If the other party was from the foreign races, then it would make sense. Baidu search 081 Chinese network yen. No advertising words. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.